stage of execution. Oxford Bookstore that has been our partners in crime every step along the way as co-producers of the festival. I want to thank the entire team headed by Preeti Paul and the skilled backup agents Nitin, Neeta, Sumit and Manas. I'd like to thank Westland Books. They have been a reliable ally supporting the Indian Crime Fiction Prize, apart from also supporting the festival very generously. I'd like to thank the Australia Council of the Arts, Norwegian Literature Abroad, the Italian Embassy Cultural Center for their steadfast support and for answering all the SOS signals. Penguin Random House India, thank you for decoding all our information to plain text. I'd also like to thank HarperCollins, Fingerprint, Kane India, Quizcraft Global for all their help in this clandestine operation. Social Housecast, thank you for hosting the writing workshop and movie screening. Park Hotel for their generous hospitality, and a big thank you to Himani Dalmia, who is also hosting our authors generously. This mission wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the leadership of our festival director, Namita Gopli. Ashwin Sanghi and Preeti Paul as festival advisors were ever ready with their inspiring ideas and guidance. I'm grateful to have Alka Pandey as a director. Kishore Desai is also a founder director but hasn't been able to join forces this year. We've missed her. I will encourage all the agents present here to actively tweet, post, share ground visuals and mission status on social media using the secret code #NoirLitFest. The mission HQ can be tagged at NOIR I'd like to now I'd like to invite Namita Gopli to come and give the inaugural speech for the festival.
As you all know, crime fiction, thrillers, noir, psychoanalysis is a very deep part of it, understanding the mind, and I wonder what but we can probe that later. I'd just like to give you a little background on how this festival came to being and how it might possibly move further, not just the festival, but the genre which it so enthusiastically supports. I myself am a writer of literary fiction and also I work on mythology, so this is a subject which is both far from my heart and close to my heart. Sometimes when the narcissism or the self-absorption of pure fiction gets a little exhausting, one goes to what I call the genre of genres, which is this style of writing that covers so many sub-styles. Because within it, we see all there is of human nature. Writing, as I see it somewhere long ago in the caves, there was a fire lit somewhere, the cavemen shared their experience by dancing and singing and telling their stories and enacting in holistic ways their experiences of the hunt, of all these things. Somewhere there must have been a crime which they didn't talk about, which later came through in all the subsequent stories, which since time immortal have been the investigation of the social contract between one individual and the rules of the society he or she inhabit. And that is always a precarious relationship. And there's a thrill in breaking that contract and in being the person who acts as an individual against the laws of that society. And there is a joy of being on both sides. And often it's the most, it's the judges and rather than the fugitives who read crime fiction avidly. About 5 years ago, I also I'm one of the co-directors of the Jaipur Literature Festival, and we had a theme there called Crime and Punishment. And around that time, Kishore and I met some of the crime association of the UK people, the NOIR people that invited us very kindly to Oslo, and we explored the psychodynamics of this crime writing there and the incredible success of it in the Scandinavian countries, and tried to understand why it was so. And before that, I had written an article many years ago about why there's no crime writing in India in English so much. Of course, our honored Shekharji was always there, but otherwise there was vendetta rather than crime as a theme. And one of the reasons was there was not much accountability and responsibility in our societies. And therefore, by societies, I mean South Asian societies. And if the criminal in the last act was watching a belly dance in Dubai, it would not have had a satisfying outcome. But with society turning more and more to asking why, who, what, and why not punish those or hold them accountable, whether it is financial crime or, except for political crime, every other sort of crime, I'd say. So I think that there are very, very deep roots to this festival. I welcome our international writers to share their experiences so that those Indian writers who are understanding the scope of this style of writing, we will learn from each other, and every year this genre of genres will grow and spread its tentacles. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Namita, for putting the festival in its right perspective. I'd like to ask Neeta from Oxford Bookstore to say a few words before we start our first session.
Thank you, Namita ma'am. Thank you, Neeta ma'am. Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you to Oxford Bookstore in Delhi. I would like to thank each one of you who came in today morning and joined us for the first session. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the entire CRE team spearheaded by Ms. Neeta Kapoor. NOIR Festival has achieved huge appreciation for its programming and atmosphere that it creates. Team CRE, who's worked day in and day out for the entire programming, the curation, the sessions, and Team Oxford, which is put the decor. It's huge and commendable work that we all do together as a team to put together in front of all of you for this festival. Dear speakers, authors, publishers, and friends of literature, especially crime literature, welcome to the third edition of the NOIR Literature Festival. Welcome to the 2 days of soaking in the world of books, conversations, discussions, especially crime, suspense, and these vulnerable plots that we discussed today. The 2017 programming is perfect for any die-hard crime fan, and the events offer everything from great discussions to film screenings, and of course, you've seen your favorite crime writers in flesh and blood. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoy the festival, the conversations, the discussion. We have lots of props around. Please use them. Please use the hashtag for the festival, for the bookstore. Oxford Bookstore for Not Place is our Facebook page. Please help us spread the word. Thank you so much. Hello. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sushruti, and I'd like to welcome all of you again to the first day of sessions at the NOIR Literature Festival 2017. An initiative of the Crime Writers Forum for South Asia, co-produced by Oxford Bookstore and CRE. आप सब दिल्ली की सर्दी में सुबह-सुबह यहाँ आए, आपका बहुत-बहुत धन्यवाद. And I assure you, you will be glad you came. But before we begin, may I request everyone present here to kindly put your phones on silent. And while you have your phones, you can go ahead and hashtag NOIRLitFest, live tweet, geotag Oxford Bookstore CP, and tell everyone what's cooking here. Without further ado, we'll start with the first session for the day, Qatil Kaun. After all, life is about working out who the bad guy is. With this session, the undisputed Badshah of Indian crime writing, Surendra Mohan Pathak, returns to the festival.
We get a peek into his mind, how he thinks and plots his stories, his go-to reading list, and much more, as he is in conversation with Poonam Saxena, the National Weekend Editor of the Hindustan Times. I welcome both dignitaries onto the stage. I would also like to invite on stage Namita Gokhale for the unveiling of Surendra Mohan Pathak's latest book, Framed.
Good morning and welcome. I'm so happy to be here with the king of the crime novel, Surendra Mohan Pathak.
Before I start with this session, I want to share my handicap with my audience. I am very hard of hearing. I wear an invisible hearing aid all the time, but today I have lost it. It is a very big misfortune and misadventure with me that when I needed it most, I am not having it with me. So I have borrowed this manual one from somebody. I hope to God it will help me. If does not, please bear with me and speak a little loudly.
Should we start?
Yes.
Surendra Mohanji, you have written almost 300 novels since you began writing in the late 60s. His novels have sold in the millions. His best-selling novel, which is Paisa Lakh Ki Daketi, has sold over 25 lakh copies. So, I mean, these figures are only making me reel. How do you write so much? And you used to write in the beginning when you had a full-time job with the Indian telephone industries. इतनी किताबें आपने कैसे लिखी?
My first answer is that Providence made me do it. Then my hard work did the rest of it. I worked here all my life. I have never rested in my life. I have not done anything except writing, pursuing my government job. No third thing, no entertainment, no relaxation, no nothing. I don't know how to relax. If I ask people what are you doing, they say I am relaxing. I wish I would have learned how to relax. I have never relaxed. So I have utilized that time into writing, which I enjoyed, And number two, 300 books is not a big deal. I have heard that in Bengal, there are people who have written more than 800, and in European countries there is a score of even 1500. But I have heard that they will write in a group, in association, 10 and 12 writers will contribute to what is being published, the way a present writer also does. Patterson.
Yeah, James Patterson.
James Patterson, he has again 12 writers. For every month, every other month, there is an hour. If he writes by himself everything, he cannot accomplish it. It takes a year to write an hour. So, but when you have nothing else to do, you can manage somehow. This score has accumulated without my knowledge. One bright morning, I was surprised to know I have written that many books. There was not a target in my mind that I have to read or I have to that. There is not a target of life in my mind, how long I will live. When I have a target of a number of books I intend to write. So it happened, it just happened. I didn't do it.
But you wrote at night when your work was over, you wrote in the evenings. How did it work actually?
I will tell you one. I never wrote in the evening. Never in my life I started writing in the evening. I will write early in the morning or at all. And most of the time I wrote on holidays and Sundays. And had a long shift of 15 to 16 hours without a break. That made me accomplish something. But never in the evening, never on working day, I put up an hour or an hour or a half. Never. I will not sit with a paper and pen until I can put up 15 hours shift. So I trained myself into utilizing my time. I was in government employment, there was only one holiday on Sunday, I had to write a lot on Sunday. If I miss one Sunday, there will be a gap of fortnight which I could not afford. So I forego lots of niceties and luxuries of life to see that I continue writing. I managed some.
Surendra Mohanji, your heroes or rather anti-heroes are very interesting characters and you have series around all of them. So the first hero is Sunil, who is an investigative reporter with a newspaper called Blast, and he lives in an imaginary city called Rajnagar. And I believe I read an interview where it said that you wanted to be a journalist yourself. So how did Sunil happen, and really is Sunil the character you are closest to?
I will let you know. But first I want to bring to the notice of my audience that this investigative journalism term was coined in early 70s. Before early 70s, nobody heard of this term. It is a very fashionable term now. Everybody is an investigative journalist. But this term came into vogue. It was coined, as far as I remember, in early 70s. I wrote my first Sunil series novel in 1963 and I depicted him as an investigative journalist. How it happened, I don't know. But this is God's truth. This term has been coined actually by me. Number one. Why I chose my hero to be a journalist, there was a reason behind it. At that time, all the famous writers and their heroes, inspectors, CID officers, military men, like that. There was a very popular writer, Ibn Sabi. His hero was Colonel Vinod. And he will sit in a police station, which is not possible. But it never occurred to us that it is a very awkward thing to read that a colonel is running a thana. But it never occurred even. So such were the type of the heroes that were in vogue at that time, and I didn't want to follow anybody's line. So the choice left with me was the investigative journalist. He also investigated like a detective. So I picked up, and I was fully ridiculed by making a journalist hero. Everybody ridiculed me. No, the journalist कोई जासूसी novel का hero हो सकता है. These spice novel का काफी फटकार पड़ी. Even my publisher suggested that I should change to some other hero. I did not. But later it caught the market, and then everybody insisted that he will have a journalist as a hero. So this is the story of Sunil. Since I have written so far 121 full-length novels of this series, and intend to continue till I am there.
Surendra Mohanji, your most successful character in series is probably Vimal. So Vimal is a man who was deceived by his wife and her lover and sent to jail, and then he escapes, and then he becomes like a wanted man on the run. And there is a series of books about his escapades and adventures. So tell us about this character and how he became your most successful character and this became your most successful series.
मैं उसके लिए मेरे को पहले ये कबूल करना पड़ेगा कि मैं कारोबारी लेखक हूँ. मेरा कारोबार लिखना है. आई एम नॉट अ राइटर, आई एम बिजनेसमैन, माय बिजनेस इज राइटिंग. तो जब बिजनेस राइटिंग हो तो उसमें वैरायटी लाना बड़ा जरूरी हो जाता है. हलवाई का काम है, अगर उसकी जलेबी ना बिके जलेबी ना बिके तो वो इमरती बनाता है, इमरती ना बिके तो बर्फी बनाता है. मतलब है, मेरे को अपने बारे में कोई इल्यूजन नहीं है, मैं साहित्यकार नहीं हूँ. I write
too modest to
I like to entertain. If reader feel entertained by writing my book, my mission is successful. I don't want to be marked myself as a literature, which I am not. I wish I were, but I am not. I never even tried to be one. Whatever I am doing, I am very happy with that. But this, for the sake of variety, I concocted another character because at that time I felt that Sunil series were getting monotonous. People were complaining that half the novel has become anticipatory.
Has become what?
Anticipatory. Matlab, he is the hero, he cannot be the murderer. And the person to whom he is quoting, he also cannot be murderer. So the choice of culprits used to be very much curtailed, which told about that kind of writing. So I picked a hero whose life was totally dependent on organized crime, and whatever it did on purpose, it clicked to an extent that everybody started copying me. I used to feel sometimes that I am running a school how to write a women series novel. Everybody copied me, even in films. So it was a new kind of thing which had to happen because it was in my fate. So I have earned a lot of acclaim by that. I wrote 42 novels of the series in about 35 years. So that is my most successful, and that is the series which is reprinted every novel 7-8 times, a few 10 times, 20 times. In Hindi, it is a big deal. English is a vast language. English book is sold in the whole world. Hindi book is not sold in the whole India even. If there is a Hindi belt, it's North India, MP, UP, Rajasthan, Bihar. Hindi is dependent on these states. If there is a sale here, a man is successful. If there is no sale here, he is nowhere. So Hindi is a stepsister of English. It is not read even in whole India. So I am not as fortunate as people writing in English who have international readership.
And your third character is a character called Sudhir, who I love the description Sudhir has of himself. He says, "मैं दिल्ली का खास किस्म का हरामी हूँ." So I want to know about Sudhir and how he embodies Delhi, in what way. And you've been in Delhi now for a long time also. So tell us about the character and your relationship with the city and how you came here.
I created a character who took pride in being a sister. So if somebody calls me Harami, he will say thank you. He don't mind it. So it also clicked because Delhi people are like that only. Every single person, including SM Pathak, is a franchising corner. यहाँ या जमीन की कीमत है या कमीन की कीमत है, बस.
आप दिल्ली पार्टीशन के टाइम पे आए थे ना, तो उसके बारे में जरा बताइए. You were how old? You were 8 years old when partition happened, and you came. Do you have memories of that time?
पार्टीशन का गवाह तो हूँ मैं, उसका भुक्तभोगी भी हूँ, भुगता भी हुआ है, लेकिन छोटा था, इतनी ज्यादा जानकारियां तो नहीं है, लेकिन काफी हारस की मेरे को बात ये है. रोज आग लगती थी, रोज गोलियां चलती थी, हिंदुओं के मोहल्ले में मुसलमान की लाश पड़ी मिलती थी, रात को फेंक जाते थे टेरर फैलाने के लिए. मुस्लिम मोहल्लों में जो भी लाश पड़ी मिलती थी, लोग टेरर में रहते थे. जिनके किराए के मकान थे वो तो जल्दी भाग गए थे, लेकिन जो प्रॉपर्टी होल्डर थे वो तो ऐसे छोड़ के नहीं जा सकते थे। ऊपर से उस वक्त के नेता थोड़ा मिसगाइड करते थे, रोज रेडियो पर अनाउंसमेंट होती थी ये जोग्राफिकल पार्टीशन है और कोई फर्क नहीं आएगा, जो जहाँ रह रहा है वही रहेगा। असल में तो ऐसा हुआ नहीं। इस बुलावे में जिन लोगों ने जल्दी शिफ्ट नहीं किया उन्होंने सफर किया, किसी ने जान खोई, किसी ने मार खोया, बस बुरे हाल में लोग वहां से निकल के आए। वो वर्ल्ड के कहते हैं हाईएस्ट डिस्प्लेसमेंट है वो पार्टीशन 1947 की, इतना और कभी कहीं नहीं हुआ। अभी और भी आधा हो सकता था, कुछ वजहों से रुका। उनमें से एक तो यही वजह थी कि दिल्ली के इंडिया के मुसलमानों को आश्वासन दिया गया कि आप यहाँ सेफ हो, मत जाओ, काफी लेंगे, लेकिन हिंदू तो सारे निकल गए। पाकिस्तान में 1% हिंदू भी नहीं है, जो है वो आना चाहते हैं। सरकार कोई रास्ता निकालने की कोशिश कर रही है कि उनको शरणागत का दर्जा दिया जाए, वो यहाँ आ सके, लेकिन बड़े खराब दिन थे, बहुत खराब दिन थे। दिल्ली पहुंच जाने के बाद भी, पार्टीशन से सेफ निकल आने के बाद भी खराब। लूटमार ऐसी देखी कहीं ऐसे सब बंद घर होते थे कि 3-3 दिन में खाली नहीं हुए। इतना सामान उनके घर से कीमती सामान निकला, तो 3-3 दिन लूटते रहे और वो फिर भी कुछ ना कुछ चुराने के लिए मिल जाता था। कोई पुलिस बंदोबस्त, कोई रोकने वाला, बिल्कुल कुछ नहीं था। मैंने ऐसी लूट अपनी आंखों से देखी। उसमें भी एक इंटरेस्टिंग बात थी कि जलंधर में मुसलमानों के घर से कोई आइटम चुरा के लाता था कोई आदमी, भीड़ से निकल के देखता था कि ज्यादा कीमती नहीं है, तो उसको गली में फेंक के फिर पूछ जाता था कि ज्यादा कीमती लूट नहीं। तो ऐसे एक बार मैं बहुत छोटा था तो मुझे अपनी गली में ना चप्पलों का एक हार पड़ा मिला, सैंडलों का, लेडीज की सैंडलें जो होती हैं कुछ ऐसे पिरोई होती है ना रस्सी में बांध के, तो 20 के करीब वो थी। मैं घर ले आया, माँ बड़ी खुश हुई, बहुत कीमती चप्पलें थी। तो फिर जब उसने ठीक से देखा तो समझ आया कि वो बंदा क्यों फेंक गया। वो सारे दाएं पैर के इसलिए उसने फेंका, इसीलिए हमने फेंका, किसी काम का नहीं था। लेकिन लूट के नजारे बहुत किए लोगों ने, इंतहा कर दी। और उसमें इंतहा में जो पुलिस है वो कंट्रीब्यूटर, कोई नहीं रोकता, पीट करके खड़े हो जाता।
But now you've been in Delhi all your life?
अब तो दिल्ली वाले ही हैं कि my grandchildren doesn't even speak Punjabi. I feel sorry for that. भाई माँ बोली तो जाके नहीं चाहिए, मातृभाषा तो आनी चाहिए ना। हमारे यहाँ माँ बोली कहते हैं, मातृभाषा का ट्रांसलेशन ही है माँ बोली, मातृभाषा। तो वो तो उसकी थोड़ी होनी चाहिए कदर। बाकी में नहीं है, बंगालियों के बच्चे तो कहीं भी नहीं बंगाली बोलते हैं। पंजाबी में पता नहीं क्या प्रॉब्लम है। पेरेंट्स पे हाँ, मैं अपने आप को क्रिटिसाइज कर रहा हूँ। घर में हिंदी बोलते हैं, सरदार को कनाडा में सरदार मिल जाए ना, वो उससे पंजाबी में बात नहीं करेगा। हाउ आर यू जी, आई एम क्वाइट वेल जी। बंगाली को बंगाली मिले, कहीं भी नॉर्थ पोल पर मिले, वो उससे बंगला में बात करेगा।
The Bengalis, yeah, do they agree? Surendraji, what do you think accounts for the popularity of your books and characters? मतलब इतनी तादाद में लोग पढ़ते खरीदते थे, and we keep hearing that these books were read on train journeys and they were particularly sold at railway platforms. Was it the thrill of such novels? Was it in a way like it was forbidden pleasure? What was it?
देखिए ये डिफिकल्ट क्वेश्चन है। पॉपुलैरिटी का कुछ पता नहीं लगता। मैंने बहुत अनडिजर्विंग कैंडिडेट देखे हैं जो बहुत पॉपुलर हो जाते हैं, बहुत देखे हैं। उनमें कोई गुण नहीं होता सिवाय इसके कि तकदीर सोने की कलम से लिखवा के आए होते हैं। हमारे ट्रेड में राइटर है, कुछ नहीं आता। एक फिक्रा कामा फुल स्टॉप गलत किए बिना नहीं लिख सकते, लेकिन बहुत मशहूर है। वो नहीं मशहूर, उनकी किस्मत मशहूर है। मेरे को जो मेरा अपना वैल्यूएशन है पॉपुलैरिटी के मामले में, मेरी भाषा जो है, जो अंदाज़े बयान जिसको उर्दू में कहते हैं, वो कुछ लोगों को ज्यादा पसंद आई। मेरे को आई एम नॉट प्रोफिशिएंट इन एनी लैंग्वेज, नॉट इन इंग्लिश, नॉट इन हिंदी, नॉट इन उर्दू, नॉट इन पंजाबी। मेरे को चारों में से कोई भी भाषा दुरुस्त नहीं आती। मैं साइंस स्टूडेंट था, पंजाबी मेरी मातृभाषा है, तो सोर्स ऑफ मीडियम ऑफ एजुकेशन था पार्टीशन से पहले। सारी शिक्षा आर्ट स्कूल में, चाहे बाउंड्री लाइन से इधर उधर उर्दू में होती थी। खानों का, कोर्ट के, सारा कुछ उर्दू में चलता था। तो उर्दू इस वजह से आ गई कि वहाँ स्कूल में ही उर्दू पढ़ाई जाती थी। इंग्लिश मजबूरन आ गई क्योंकि मैं साइंस स्टूडेंट था। तो उर्दू, हिंदी, इंग्लिश, पंजाबी, इन 4 भाषाओं का हिंदी सिखा दी। पार्टीशन में दिल्ली आके बोलनी पड़ी, रहना पड़ा। तो इन 4 भाषाओं की मैंने अपनी एक ऐसी खिचड़ी तैयार की जो बहुत क्लिक कर गई, बहुत क्लिक कर गई। भाई रवानगी में लिखो डायलॉग को, ये ना सोचो कि आपका एडवर्ब कौन सी लैंग्वेज का है, आपका एडजेक्टिव कौन सी लैंग्वेज है। जो सूझे, जो हाथ में आए लिख दो। और वो रवानगी ने ही ऐसा क्लिक किया कि लोगों को पढ़ने में रुचि आती थी। सारा नावल पढ़ने के बाद भले ही वो ये कहे कि अच्छा नहीं लगा, लेकिन मेरे अंदाजे बयान की वजह से वो कोई बीच में नहीं छोड़ सकता था। तो ये भी एक कामयाबी की किस्म है। उर्दू के सारे राइटरों में ये खूबी है, उनकी नस्ल जिसको कहते हैं, उनको पढ़ने में आपको आनंद आ जाएगा। हो सकता है जो स्टोरी लाइन है उससे आपको इत्तेफाक ना हो। हिंदी में नहीं है, हिंदी में उपनिषद लिखते हैं, नवल भी ऐसे लिखते हैं कि आप डिक्शनरी में देखो तो समझ में आए। ऐसी भाषा किस काम की जो आम रीडर के पढ़ने में ना आए, जो समझ में ना आए, डिक्शनरी खोल के देखनी पड़े। बहुत राइटर है ऐसे, जानबूझ के उसको एम्बिगुअस बना के लिखने वाले हैं। रवानगी वाली जुबान होनी चाहिए, रवानगी वाली का समझ में आए। हाँ, लेकिन वो पता नहीं, शायद इसलिए कि उनका पहले से ही टारगेट होता है कि कोर्स में लगेगी, टेक्स्ट बुक बनेगी। तो मैं उसे हो सकता है मे बी दे डोंट राइट फॉर मार्क्स, they write for a particular class.
So the unputdownable quality of your books, because of the easy language, the plots, the characters, probably all just came together to make a bestseller. Surendramohanji, you have also translated James Hadley Chase and Ian Fleming. How did that happen?
Translated? No, this is a misconception.
This is what I read in
This
your...
is a misconception. My present publisher, Harper also portrays me as the translator of Ian Fleming. But God's truth is I have never read Ian Fleming, much less translating it.
ये कैसे आया?
पता नहीं कैसे आया, मेरी समझ में नहीं आया। एक आध बार एतराज भी किया, उन्होंने कहा ठीक कर देंगे, लेकिन वो उनका वो टेक्स्ट बनी बनाई होती है। इंटरेस्टिंग बात है कि जिसके लिए कहते हैं कि मैंने अपने कैरियर की शुरुआत ही इयान फ्लेमिंग के नॉवेल्स को ट्रांसलेट करके किए। मैंने एक अक्षर आज तक उसी की किताब पढ़ी। I am great admirer of his books, but I cannot manage to read a novel written by Ian Fleming. बहुत कुछ नहीं होता उसमें, कुछ नहीं होता। दो पेज की कहानी होती है, 200 पेज में घसीटी होती है। नहीं सकती। उसके कंपैरिजन में जेम्स हैडली चेस को मैं बहुत पढ़ता था और उसका मैं आज भी एडमायरर हूँ। मैं मिस्ट्री राइटर का एक बेसिक इंग्रेडिएंट ये समझता हूँ कि जो आपका प्लॉट है, जो आपकी टेक्स्ट है, उसकी टेक ऑफ बड़ी क्विक होनी चाहिए। मतलब ऐसा नहीं है कि आप 200 पेज के नावल है, 75 पेज ऐसे के बाद कहानी शुरू हो रही है, अभी कैरेक्टर इंट्रोड्यूस हो रहे हैं, आप एटमॉस्फेयर ही बना रहे हो। ये बात के मेरे को नहीं हजम होती। ये दुनिया की सबसे बड़ी ये अब्बू जो है, दुनिया की सबसे बड़ी लेखिका अगाथा क्रिस्टी है, उनके 100 पेज झेलने पड़ते हैं। लेकिन उनका करिश्मा कमाल भी नहीं, उनका करिश्मा ये है कि वो बाकी के 100 पेजों में पहले 100 पेजों की एक एक बात को प्रिसाइजली जस्टिफाई करके दिखा देती है। ये आर्ट भी बड़ा दुर्लभ है। लेकिन केस की दूसरी बात की थी, उसका नावल पहले चैप्टर से नहीं टेक ऑफ करता था, पहले पेज से भी टेकअप करता था, पहले पैराग्राफ से भी टेकअप करता था, पहली लाइन से टेकअप करता था। उसके एक नॉवल की शुरुआती लाइन सुनिए, अगर किसी ने पढ़ा हो तो याद हो, मेरे को नाम याद नहीं है। ये मैन इज स्टैंडिंग at 8th floor balcony of his hotel and scanning the crowd of the beach to choose a prospective victim for murder. अब बताइए कैसे ये लाइन पढ़ने के बाद बंदा उस नावल को पढ़ने से छोड़ देगा। And on the 5th page, the person was chosen was murdered also. तो ये टेक ऑफ की अपनी बांधी होती है, कोई इसको मानता है कोई नहीं मानता है। गार्डनर के नावल में लिखा पहले पेज से कहानी शुरू हो जाती है, लेकिन मैंने बहुत राइटर देखे हैं वो बड़े टेक इट इजीली, बड़े आराम से अलसाए ढंग से जो है लेजीली वो किसी मुकाम पर पहुंचेंगे और उसके बाद पता लगेगा भी कहानी किस बात है। पहले 50 पेज में तो शायद आपको यही नहीं पता लगेगा कि ये मिस्ट्री है, स्पियानेज है, क्या है, सोशल नॉवल है। ऐसे भी मैंने पढ़े हैं, लेकिन मेरी ट्रेनिंग यही कहती है कि नावल का टेक ऑफ बड़ा क्विक होना चाहिए। मैं कोशिश करता रहता हूँ, एक बार नहीं हो पाया तो मैंने सारा रीराइट किया, फ्लैशबैक में ले जाके पहले जो इम्पोर्टेंट इवेंट थी पहले डिपिक्ट की कि रीडर पकड़ा जाए, पकड़ में आ जाए, नहीं तो छोड़ के चल जाए। मैं जो लिखता हूँ उसको रीडर की निगाह से देखता हूँ। रीडर को पसंद है मैं पास हूँ, रीडर को नहीं पसंद मैं फेल हूँ। मैं अपनी तरफ से अपने जितने मर्जी पूतने लगाऊं, मैंने बहुत बढ़िया लिखा है। Everything is meaningless until my reader declares it. तो इस निगाह से लिखने से अगर कुछ तो जरूर फर्क पड़ता है।
सुरेंद्र मोहन जी, आपने कहा कि बॉम्बे में कई फिल्म्स आपकी नॉवेल्स को लेके, they are big movies based on your novels, but you had never thought of going to Bombay and actually trying to get filmmakers to make films legally and properly on your novels rather than just pinching stories from your books. ऐसा आपने कभी सोचा? हाँ।
मैं तो सोचूंगा कि अगर मेरे में कुछ ऐसा तो किसी को लगता है कोई इस किस्म की पॉसिबिलिटीज है तो दूसरे जगह सोचे। हमारी फिल्म इंडस्ट्री की ये बड़ी मिसफॉर्चून है कि यहाँ पढ़ने का रिवाज नहीं है, बाकी कंट्रीज में ऐसा नहीं है। उनके बकायदा उनके डिपार्टमेंट्स हैं जो इन बातों के लिए वर्ल्ड लिटरेचर पर निगाह रखते हैं। इफ देयर इज अ बेस्ट सेलर एनीवेयर ऑन द ग्लोब, इट हैज टू बिकम अ फिल्म, इफ नॉट अ फिल्म टीवी सीरियल। उसकी कामयाबी बेकार नहीं जाने वाली, ये भी नहीं हो सकता कि फिल्म पर्संस की निगाह में ना है। हमारे यहाँ ऐसा बिल्कुल नहीं है, कोई पढ़ता नहीं है, बिल्कुल कोई नहीं पढ़ता, सब माथे पे हाथ रख के बैठ जाते हैं, सुनाओ सुनाओ क्यों सुनाओ, आई हैव डन माय जॉब, डू योर जॉब। अभी भी मैं सुनाओ ही करूँ, क्यों सुनाओ करूँ? सुनाया तो है मैंने कि 300 पेज लिखे हैं, इसको सुनाना ही तो कहते हैं, और क्या सुनो। अब तो मेरे पास ऐसे भी फिल्म वाले आए हैं कि वो आप बड़े फेमस हो, मैं कि नहीं जी बड़े तो नहीं है फेमस, लेकिन थोड़ा सा नाम है। नहीं ठीक है, आप हमें पसंद है, आपका स्टाइल पसंद है, आप हमारे लिए लिखो, कहानी मेरे पास है। तो मैं कभी खुद लिखो, मैं तुम्हारे लिए क्यों लिखूं, मैं मुंशी हूँ तुम्हारा। वे उम्मीद करते हैं कि उछल जाएगा, बात क्या है, ट्रांसक्राइब भी करना है ना, कहानी तो बंदे के पास है। नहीं मैंने सुननी भी नहीं है, किसी ने सुन लिया, मेरे को बहुत कहानी है, मैंने आपकी कहानी से मांगनी है। वो हैरान होते हैं, भाई यू आर गेटिंग अ चांस टू गेट योरसेल्फ इंट्रोड्यूस्ड इन फिल्म इंडस्ट्री, बट आई डोंट वांट दैट काइंड ऑफ चांस। या फिर ऐसे लोग आते हैं जो कहते हैं कि इसी बात से कुछ हो जाओ कि आपके नावल पर फिल्म बन रही है, पैसे वैसे का नाम ना लो। क्यों नाम ना नहीं? आई राइट फॉर मनी, आई हैव नेवर कंसीडर्ड। मैं स्वांता सुखाया नहीं लिखता, मैं मुद्रा सुखाया लिखता हूँ, किसी को अच्छा लगे चाहे ना लगे। हाँ, जिस काम में पैसा नहीं वो किसी ने करना। मैं मजदूर हूँ, कोई जल्दी वाला हूँ। हाँ, वो कोई जल्दी वाला भी सामान उठाता है तो पैसे मांगता है। मैं कलम तोड़ दिए, दिमाग खराब कर दिया, बाल बच्चों के सुख से महरूम हो गया, मुझे कुछ ना मिले। हाँ, मैं आप सवाल का जवाब दूं इसका। एक वो फॉक्स स्टार वाला, उनका वो बंदा वकील भी साथ ही गया। सुनो सुनने लायक बात है। एग्रीमेंट ड्राफ्ट करके पहली ड्राफ्ट एग्रीमेंट कितने पेज का? 28 पेज का। सिंगल स्पेस में फुल A4 शीट पे टाइप किया हुआ, 2 दिन पढ़ने में लगे और हफ्ता समझने में लगे। देखिए ये एग्रीमेंट है, ये तो इस चीज से तो फिर थोड़ा और बड़ा करते नावली हो जाता है। चलो वो भी कार्य, चलो आपके लिए कंटेन कर देंगे, वो कर देगा। तो मैंने उसको ये बोला कि विमल सीरीज का एक नॉवल उसने सिलेक्ट किया है। He has a plan to picturize one novel, which he will start in 3 years. अपने आप का उसने. But he wanted me to commit rights of all the 42 books, which he will not be in a position to consume in 100 years. Am I a clod? Why should I do that? And for a very meager amount, which I could get by getting a book reprinted. I told him, कहता जी फिल्म का अपना ग्रामर है, अपना मेरे को वहाँ पहुँच गया, मैं क्या यार मैं जाऊँ ठीक नहीं किया मैंने। ऑफर बहुत मिलती है, इच्छा भी बहुत है कि कोई ऐसी कोई रिकॉग्निशन मिले, लेकिन जिस किस्म का कारोबार वहाँ चलता है, जितना कैजुअल वो राइटर के बारे में है। 100 साल हो गए फिल्म इंडस्ट्री को, हिंदुस्तान में 2 बंदों को थोड़ी बहुत इज्जत मिली है और एक राइटर बता दो जिसकी वहां पर इज्जत हुई है। एक पंडित मुकराम शर्मा हुए, उनकी इज्जत थी, और एक सलीम जावेद ने नाम कमाया, बाकी जिन्होंने कोई अपनी तरफ का कारोबार किया है। बाकी राइटर क्या है, हुक्का भरने वाला है, जाके चिलने बढ़ गया और राइटर की क्या बात है, मुंशी है उनका, चले क्या डायलॉग ये लिखो, ऐसे होता है नहीं।
And so sad because I think Vimal would make such a lovely TV series.
हाँ मिले वो भी मिले। अब क्या फरमाते हैं कि बजट का 1% हमारे यहाँ शेड्यूल है राइटर को देने का। कितने बजट में बनती है, कहते हैं 75 लाख में एक एपिसोड बनता है। तो मैं कह तो 7,500 रुपए तो हाँ, मैं मेरे को 1 लाख रुपए रिप्रिंट के मिलते हैं। जी देख लो, ये रोज मिलेगा। उसके सेल पिच ये थी कि ये 256 डेज के लिए ये रोज मिल रहा है आपको। तो नहीं, मेरा मन नहीं, मैं नहीं चाहता, मुझे ऐसी झूठी तसल्लियों वाला कारोबार नहीं होता। मैं किताब छपती रहे, मैं खुश हूँ, मैं किताब से उसमें अड़ंगा है तो आई एम इंटरेस्टेड। बाकी बीच में नौजवानी की बातें हैं, उस वक्त कुछ बातें लुभाती है, मेरी उम्र में नहीं लुभाती। मैंने जो कंप्लीट कर लिया मुझे सफिशिएंट दिखाई देता है। मैंने आसमान नहीं छूना, सितारों के साथ नहीं भटकना, जमीन पर पाँव लगे रहे, यही अच्छा है।
Surendra Mohanji, you are still a really popular writer, but has the publishing industry of these crime novels and these best-selling, affordably priced novels, has it suffered in recent years because of the coming of television? Has satellite television delivered any kind of blow to the industry?
Madam, television or no television, it is a diminishing.
Why?
The traditional puppet book, which was started by puppet books priced at 1 rupee, that is gone. That is a long distant dream. There is no publisher left with that yet who will publish that kind of novel. Price may not be 1 rupee, maybe 100 rupees, but there is nobody left there who will carry the torch of that time. In 80s and 90s, there used to be 70 to 80 publishers and hundreds of history writers who were catering this industry in 80s and 90s. Presently, there is 1 publisher in Delhi and 2 in Meerut, that is all. Now you can well imagine how long they will survive. And there is no writer left other than me. And I am also surviving only because I diversified and toward the line of Harvard College. Otherwise, I also would have been nowhere. So this is the fate of traditional pocket book in India, which was low priced, which was to be read by every single person from borrowing from lending libraries and all that. And created going to diminish God, but is left will be over by a decade to the maximum. no new publisher is coming, no new writer is coming. If at all some writer appears in Hindi, nobody will publish him. Such is not the case in English. They are literary agents. Publisher also does not behave like that. He also goes through the script. Their editorial department. They to won't give you a blanket reply. हम नहीं चाहते जी. हिंदी में आपको ये जवाब मिलेगा, हम नहीं चाहते. इंग्लिश में एक नावल छपवाना आसान है, वो ना चले या वो बात जुदा है, वो राइटर के अपने दमखम पे निर्भर करता है. लेकिन हिंदी में तो कोई छपवा के दिखा है, भाई कल आदमी तो मिल जाए हिंदी में छपवा के दिखा दी, नहीं छपेगा, नहीं छपेगा, नहीं छपेगा.
So I think we have really just 5 minutes left. Are there any questions from the audience? We can take, I think, a couple of questions. Otherwise, I'll go back to my questions.
Please keep in mind my bad hearing.
You want to ask?
Yes. The question I have is, out of the 300 we just saw framed in English, do you have a lineup of all the others or some of the others being translated into English? So that gives you a much bigger audience.
I think 65 lakh heist has been translated into English. 65 lakh की डकैती का तो अनुवाद हुआ है. And this one, any other books which are going to be translated?
It is there, but translator is hard to find. Because I have translated myself. I wasted my time. Translation, how much the English book will get me? 1 lakh rupees. Hindi book gets me 5 lakh rupees. So, commercially, I wasted my time into a thankless job. It is publisher's fault to find a book. Translator कैसे भी try किया है, 20 पेज पढ़े थे, अच्छा नहीं है. Finished. तो क्या करें बता? आसरत है, हमारी भी ख्वाहिश है भी देश तबीजा के बगल में किताब रखी हो. मतलब कहने का ये है, लेकिन वो ट्रांसलेटर की प्रॉब्लम है. जो अच्छा ट्रांसलेटर करते हैं वो इतने पैसे मांगते हैं, पब्लिशर अफोर्ड नहीं कर सकता, वो देना नहीं चाहता. इसी डोरड्रम में सब ड्रॉप हो जाता है मामला. This framed and Colaba conspiracy, I translated myself. I have translated another novel also. But it takes upon my limited time that I am having in my life. It is not job what's doing by a writer whose book sells as it is. So ये बात है. और फिर दूसरी बात ये है कि मैं डायरेक्ट अंग्रेजी में भी लिखूँ ना, तो रीडर यही समझेगा कि हिंदी से किसी दूसरे ने ट्रांसलेट किया है. मेरे को इंग्लिश राइटर कोई नहीं कहने लगा कि ये अंग्रेजी में लिखने वाला राइटर है. ये भी एक एंडिंग है. नया राइटर आता है, लिखता है, धड़ल्ले से बोलता है इट इज डेब्यू नॉवल चल रही, बड़ी खुशी की बात है. मेरी किताब के बारे में कोई नहीं कहने लगा कि राइटर ने पहली बार अंग्रेजी में लिखा.
You have a question?
आपने जो ये एक अपार्ट फ्रॉम कंटेंट आपने जो ओवर द इयर्स बढ़ाया उसको, एक जो चीज मैंने नोटिस की वो ये कि पहले जो लिखे जाते थे नॉवेल्स, आप बहुत इस बारे में स्ट्रांगली लिखते थे कि राइटर को ठीक पैसे मिलने चाहिए, नॉवेल्स के दाम भी ठीक होने चाहिए. Then you also insisted on the quality of the paper, etc. And ultimately now I am seeing कि लास्ट 3-4 सालों से आपकी किताबें हार्पर कॉलिंस से छप रही हैं, जो कि which is a far cry from merit. तो ये इसके बारे में थोड़ा बताइए.
Sir, my insistence in this matter has not helped me. मेरे कहने से होने वाला ये काम नहीं है. हार्पर कॉलिंस के अपने स्टैंडर्ड है, अपनी ट्रेडिशन है. उन्होंने मेरे कहे बिना भी पेपर ऐसे ही छापने, लेकिन जो मेरा ट्रेडिशनल हिंदी का पब्लिशर है उसने रिसाइकल्ड पेपर पे किताब छापनी है, क्योंकि रिसाइकल्ड पेपर बहुत सस्ता है, उसके बिना किताब सस्ती आ नहीं सकती. उसका कंट्रीब्यूशन ट्रेड के लिए ज्यादा है, आपातकालीन का कम है. उसका रीजन सुनिए. सारे दुनिया में जन जन के पास हिंदुस्तान में किताब पहुंचाने के पीछे मेजर रोल जो है रिसाइकल्ड बुक्स का. वो ना होती तो आज इतने रीडर ना होते. अगर जब रीडर मल्टीप्लाई हो गए तो उनमें से कोई अच्छा भी पढ़ेगा, कोई साहित्य की तरफ रुचि रखेगा. जब रीडर ही नहीं है तो फिर क्या होगा. तो रिसाइकल्ड पेपर का अपना रोल था. व्हाइट पेपर की किताब बड़ी खूबसूरत लगती है, बड़ी मॉरल बूस्टिंग है, सब कुछ ठीक है, लेकिन जो रिसेप्शन रिसाइकल पेपर पे चेकी किताब को उसके लो प्राइस होने की वजह से है, वो नहीं हो सकती। एक टाइम नहीं है, एक मिसाल आपको और देता हूँ। ये फ्रेम्ड है, इसकी प्राइस 300 रुपये है। इसका देसी वर्जन 1000 पड़ा है वहां पर, वो 130 रुपये में है। वर्ल्ड बाय वर्ल्ड सेम है। क्यों है ये फर्क? वही कागज है, वही टाइटल है, वही पब्लिशर है, वही राइटर है। क्यों है अंग्रेजी की किताब 300 रुपये में? क्योंकि इंग्लिश के रीडर की पेइंग कैपेसिटी है। He can afford to invest 300 rupees on a book. Hindi reader cannot. They are cashing up on this thing. When a publisher can publish a book of same pages, same time, same everything at a low price, why you charge for the same material when it is doubly when it is in English? There is no answer to this. It has become an established norm. If there is a book going to be in English, it has to be at least 300 rupees price.
I quite like the idea of recycled paper. It's good for the environment. But I think we've run out of time. So thank you so much, and thank you, Surendra Mohanji, for the lovely conversation. It's a pleasure.
For everyone who wants to get their books signed, book signings are happening just outside when you step out of this venue. Pathaji will be available there for signing of all books. I'd like to thank the guests again for that very entertaining and candid session. I also have two announcements to make. We have a workshop and movie screening scheduled for later in the day at our parallel venue, Anti-Social in Horsecast Village. The Jailbird workshop will be happening at 3 p.m. there, and we'll be screening Bonnie and Clyde at 5:30 p.m. at Anti-Social in HKV. For more details, please do visit our website. With that, we move to the second panel for today. In the previous panel, we just discussed about how investigative journalism came to be as a genre. And taking that forward, the authors will be in conversation about this very crime solver journalist who is unburdened by the need to stick to official methods of investigation while dealing with high-profile crimes involving dirty politics and espionage. The panel has Thomas Inger and Uday Sarpati in conversation with Sandeep Onithan. Judgment Day, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to introduce my partners in crime. Burned, pierced, scarred, cursed. I'm not describing what a lot of people would describe the US elections and their aftermath. These are the titles of the crime fiction series by Thomas Enger, who joins us from Oslo, Norway, which is very far away. Thomas worked as a journalist for 10 years before beginning his crime fiction career. He felt compelled to transition from journalism to fiction because he believed he wanted to tell his own stories rather than reporting others. I mean, that's a lot of inspiration for journalists in this room. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you very much.
I also have with me Uday Sarpati, whose first novel, Brutal, was crowd curated. You can ask him later what exactly that was. And Brutal is what I'd like to describe as indie crime. You know, Uday is a young leader in the world of healthcare, life sciences, and IT. That's what his bio says. And Brutal was born out of his love for thrillers. I really want to know, you know, where in his work, career, or in healthcare, life sciences, and IT did he come across these experiences that he describes in his novel. I'm excited to have you both here. And so I'll just shoot the first question. Now, all the protagonists, both the protagonists in your series are investigative journalists. And in June works for a web paper, 1 to 3 News.
Yes.
And Prakash Sinha works for the Daily Globe TV channel. How does 24/7 news, how does the 24/7 news cycle shape your narratives? I mean, it's a reality that we all live in, and I think it's a subject of all our books as well. How does it work for you?
For me, it was when I started to write this series. I kind of felt like I had to write about something that I knew. I had been trying for 15 years to become an author. I'd written all kinds of bad novels, which had characters in them that I didn't know. They lived in places I'd never been to, for instance. So when this idea for a main character popped into my head many years ago, I kind of knew that I had to make his life quite close to my own. And I've been a journalist for many years myself. And I had worked in an online newspaper where you don't really have a deadline. The deadline has passed, but the second something has occurred. So I've kind of used all my experience from that time and put it into my books. Sorry, what was your question?
No, how you know, you used your own experiences in the online newspaper.
Yeah.
Tell your stories.
Yes, exactly. My experience as an online journalist is very far away from my main character. He's a crime reporter, where I used to write about sports, which is something completely different. But the mechanics are somewhat the same when it comes to getting to the bottom of things, in terms of getting to the truth, in terms of having clients, sources, which can help you write a good story. So even though I haven't been a crime reporter myself, I feel like I could easily write one.
Uday, how did you research Prakash Sinha's character? Did you base it on real life? You have friends in the media world who helped you along?
I don't actually, but I read a lot, and over the years, I have come across journalists, in the international books which I read, namely Steve Larson. So, that was one book, which gave me the idea, Prakash should be a character, which should be the closest to the protagonist of that novel. So that was the idea. So I being from the IT industry, so I work a lot in healthcare and life sciences domain. So the idea behind my book was, it's a sort of medical thing which is going on. So, with ghosts. So yeah. So how I began was, my background in healthcare and life sciences is very strong. And today, living in the world of exclusives and breaking news world, no journalist is safe. So my protagonist, Prakash Sinha, was a guy, while reporting in the Naxal belt of India, was previously injured. So he has his own injuries from the past. He's a broken. So that's how I wanted my protagonist to look like. He has been in the job, he has done his job, and then failed in a sort of way, and he's trying to get back into the business, the cutthroat.
You have a biological weapon in the novel, right?
Yeah.
It's very interesting premise. I haven't seen that in an Indian novel.
It is.
What's called PM 125?
NB67.
NB67. It's
Yeah.
like a, what's it called? Like a rage virus kind of thing.
Yeah, it is something sort of that, and that is the mystery in the novel. You know? So that is which makes people do things which are not in their control, and that leads to a lot of mayhem in my novel.
Right. So can you use it to explain the behavior of a certain president in the world?
So I guess the way some people in the world have been behaving, if they don't need drug like that, they can do that on their own.
Thomas, you have something to add? The truth is stranger than fiction.
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, some of the things that are happening in the world today, if you had written that in a novel, people would believe it. For instance, back in 2011 in Norway, there was this guy, I'm sure you've heard of this, who murdered a whole bunch of people
And this prediction.
Yes, exactly. He killed 77 people in one day. And if you had written that in a novel, people would just, well, I can't believe that. But it happened. So truth is really more scary than fiction. Yeah, absolutely.
That's right. I'm sure you've heard a lot of interpretations of that. Leaving aside Anders Breivik, it's a very, very unusual case. It's a black swan event. What explains Scandi crime fiction? And why is Scandinavian noir so all-pervasive? It's for such peaceful countries. The Scandinavian countries are among the lowest crime rates in the world.
Yes,
what's
absolutely.
the worst crime that you have? Bicycle theft?
No, that's on Iceland. But people ask me that question a lot when I travel around the world talking about my books. And I don't think there is a really easy explanation for this kind of crime popularity. I think people find it really fascinating that even in countries such as ours, where you have this spectacular beauty where people make a lot of money, there really shouldn't be any reason for people to commit crimes, right? But still, people do. And I think people want to read about how that can happen. And I think maybe looking at Scandinavia from an outside perspective, it certainly seems seems like a very happy, good place to live. But underneath the surface, there is something evil lurking, maybe something that people are drawn to or would like to learn more about. And the fact that we have such a spectacular climate, with the fjords and the mountains and the misty fog. I mean, there are so many exciting things to read and to learn about Scandinavia. But I think there is one single reason, which is far more easy to explain this popularity, and that reason is that the books are good. Basically. Yeah.
A lot of your characters seem to be inspired from the newspaper headlines and stories that we read about, like for instance the arms agents, the family, what are they called? The
Bushwahas.
The Bushwahas, right? They're like 3-generation arms dealers. Very interesting. Would you base that on?
So the inspiration came from, I've been a big fan of Robert Ludlum. So a lot of his novels are based on family, crime families, like second or third generation crime families, and their agenda is to control. Their agenda is the economics of the crime. So they control arms, they control mafia families, and they control even international deals and even diplomats. So that was the inspiration which came to me. Mostly, I guess there was such a family in the Matterhorn circle, one of the most celebrated novels of Robert Ludlum. So that was the inspiration for me to look for such a family in India. So this is this family, this Kushwaha, they have controlled a lot of, they pulled strings behind the politics of Indian fabric. And then what they've done is we have this world of private military going on throughout the world, the Blackwater and academies. So they have been providing bodies to these companies. So that's an innovation which I thought of. We have this same sort of thing has happened in the outsourcing industry. So I thought of why not take that to some other industry, the private military. So that was the inspiration behind such a family which is spread like tentacles throughout the Indian politics.
So, a couple of years back, a lawyer friend told me something very interesting. And he says that, lawyers and journalists, we're brothers in a sense that we can talk to whosoever without anyone wanting to know our sources and all that. We can protect our sources. Do you ever come across that thing in life that we can talk to whoever we want to as sources? We have sources who are arms dealers, they're pimps, they're drug traffickers, and policemen, and all of that. And we can do it in the line of duty.
Yeah.
And so can lawyers.
Yes, absolutely. So I found that people are telling us far more than they should, because I think they kind of like to be sources. It depends on which area you are looking for sources in. But yeah, I certainly think that once you approach someone and you say that you work for a TV network or for a newspaper, it is easier to get to talk to them. Yeah.
As a writer, do you find a problem? I mean, how do you approach your research, for instance?
It's quite similar actually as when I was a journalist. I just phone people or email them and tell them who I am and what kind of information I'm looking for. And very often people are very, very friendly and helpful. So and now that I've published 6 novels, it certainly helps because they know that
establish your name.
Yes, and they know that the kind of information they are providing me with that will really help me in so yeah.
Uday, how do you go about your research? You're working on another novel now.
Yeah,
what's it called?
It's a legal thriller. So the working title is Blind Game.
Okay.
So yeah, so talking about research. So the thing is, if you go about an international concept, mostly Americans, if you read the legal thrillers, it's all out there in the novels, But if we talk about India, not much, police procedures and the legal procedure. We don't see a legal channel in India. You can just go there and watch the court proceedings. So such a thing does not happen in India. So we have to use the old school method of research. So what I do is I go through a lot of court transcripts. There are a lot of websites which provide court transcripts. And those are the best sources which I get. And
online, you do a lot of research.
Online, yes.
Just for this next book of yours.
Yeah, this is for my next book. And for my previous book, which is Brutal, it is more like the world of journalists and the world of healthcare and pharmaceuticals. So I already had quite a bit of knowledge on pharmaceuticals. You'll be surprised. There are a lot of drugs which are prescribed by many doctors and which have a tendency of inducing violent tendencies. Mostly prescribed for depression and states like mental conditions. And a lot of these drugs have been behind the school shootings in the US. So if you look at the school shootings of the last 10 school shootings in the US, you'll find that almost 2 or 3 drugs are common. And I have used the names of such drugs in my book. So that's how I did research. And pharmaceuticals are very big corporations, $billion corporations. So they try to hide these things, but eventually if you dig hard, you will come to know about such things.
So, do you think the Indian crime fiction writer is, in a sense, spoiled for choice? Because I mean, there is so much of crime going on, all kinds of sensational crimes, with the exception, fortunately, of mass shootings. So, I mean, how and does it surprise you at the same time that there's not enough crime fiction that happens in India? Is it because people want to move away from this kind of thing that's happening around us? What's your take on it?
The thing is, crime is prevalent in India, but the conspiracies are very less. So what I found is mostly novels, would talk about a larger conspiracy behind small crime. Those are the novels who go on to get international play. So not taking something, the subgenres like who done it or things like those. But yeah, so talking about India, the things are there. Crime is there, and lack of transparency is there. So all these things, the way the police works, the way the journalists try to portray, what is there, the cutthroat competition between journalists, the police wanting to get attention. So all these things are there. So it's exciting world of crime, I'm sure a lot of these things have not yet been explored. So yeah, so we are living in an exciting world of crime fiction.
What are the ideas that you have that you're looking at in Indian crime fiction, which inspired by real life incidents or something of the sort that you're working on?
So what I do is, almost 60% of my novels are based on real ideas. Things like international conspiracies or business wars between India, China, or India, China, and US in the Middle East, things like those. So those things are always there, and Indian black operations, which are quite hidden from the world. So I read a lot in this domain, geopolitics. So that's how I bring them into my stories. So what I do is my stories will usually begin with a small murder, which should look like it will get solved by the police, and everything will work out like an open and shut case. But eventually it blows up into an international conspiracy. So that's the way I plot my novels.
Thomas, I was reading about how you got down to doing your first batch of novels. It all came to you in one go, right? 6 novels?
Yeah.
How does that happen? I can barely finish one book.
Yeah, it was a really strange situation for me because, like I said earlier, I had spent 15 years trying to write, or at least trying to become an author. And at one point, I actually quit my job as a journalist in order to become a full-time writer. The novel I was working at that time didn't. I wasn't able to finish it. Well, I did finish it, but it wasn't good enough. So I found myself unemployed, which was a really, really tough spot to be in. I quit my job. I have kids. I live in Oslo, which is a very, very expensive city to live in. So I had sort of pursued my own personal selfish dream, and it didn't work out. So I found myself at a really, really dark spot. But then all of a sudden this idea popped into my head, and I instantly knew that this idea is really, really good. So I kind of sat down and tried to analyze what had I done over those 15 years trying to write that didn't enable me to become an author. So I spent quite a lot of time trying to search, we're trying to analyze my own writing. And one of the things I discovered was that I had just kind of started writing. When I had an idea, I just started to write it. And I wrote about things and places I'd never been to. So when this idea came to me, I decided to spend a lot of time planning what I wanted to tell about this main character of mine. And I spent about 6 months doing that actually, when I was unemployed. And that is probably the smartest thing I've ever done, because once I was finished with that, I realized that I had material for 6 novels. So I kind of just pitched those 6 ideas to various publishers in Norway, and the very next day I was meeting with a publisher in Norway, and they told me that they loved the idea, and they just wanted me to start to write. And here I am 8 years later in India. So.
Have you thought today of continuing this as a series? Prakash Sinha, does he feature in other novels, or is it just a one-off?
No, I actually wanted to write a sequel as my second book, but then an exciting new idea came up. So this was a legal thriller. So this idea gripped me day in and day out. So I have that sequel in mind. So it will probably be my next book. But as of now, the legal thriller is the thing which is coming out.
Right. So, back to the topic of our discussion earlier about the journalist, the way he proceeds on investigation. Do you think he's like kind of unburdened by the need to stick to official methods? How have you handled that in your books?
Well, my main character is driven by a very, very strong personal motivation. He has lost his son in a domestic fire, and he's certain that because he was a really, really good crime investigative reporter, he had made a lot of enemies along the way during the years. The basis for this book series that I wrote is that Henning Yu, my main character, he returns to work 2 years after he has lost his son. And he does that because he wants to find out who was responsible for the fire. So, in a way, he's just trying to pick up the pieces of his life again. But in order to be able to function fully as a person, as a man, he just has to get to the bottom of that mystery. But because he works for a newspaper, he just can't work on his own case all the time. So working with other stories at the same time kind of wakes him up as a professional crime investigator reporter. So he when he works the other cases, he very much follows the rules. He's polite. He doesn't push people. But when it comes to his own story, he just stops at nothing. He just really, really wants to get to the truth. And one of the themes or questions that I talk a little bit about in these books is how far are we willing to go in order to get to the truth, in order to revenge maybe when it comes to people or to family we've lost. And to me that topic is really, really interesting. What are the boundaries? So my main character, he's constantly finding himself in situations where he may need to cross some borders in order to get to the bottom of this mystery.
Uday, how far is your character willing to go in the novel? And how do you define those boundaries?
So, my character, the protagonist, Prakash Sinha, has had a very interesting beginning. He was a sleazy journalist, in a sex and crime magazine, where he used to get into the, his stories were like, there will be insane murders, there will be sex rackets, things like those in the bedrooms of the rich people. So that's how he began, and he left that world and got into the mainstream media, as a TV journalist. So he found success there, but his background never left him. He has many contacts throughout the alleys and the underbellies, especially of Delhi. So that's how he works on the story. He has a lot of sources, and the major source or the major help, the person who provides him the help is a hacker. So this guy also has a mystery of his own. So comes from a shady company, and has contacts with Raw. Was involved in some, conspiracies of the past. So yeah, so that's how his sources are, and beyond those, he does not stop himself from getting into a crime scene also. So there is a scene in my novel in which the crime scene, it was, it had been gone through by the police, but yet he goes into it and to try to find out, a new clue which he can, gather and then work on. So that's how he operates. There is another character, another competing journalist, Seema Sharma. So she is a very bold kind of lady. So what she does is she pursues the police. So over time she has built relationships with many police people from the police, and that's how she pursues all alone, like a lone wolf. So these two characters work in different ways, and eventually their paths converge.
So, do you have a problem back home of journalists crossing the line? When they when they're reporting a particular crime or reporting a crime scene.
Well, I don't think that is generally the case that journalists really cross that border. I think many are tempted to do so, but they don't. Basically, they don't. But certainly there have been cases over the years where people have done something that they shouldn't. For instance, there was this former colleague of mine who worked in the same newspaper as me. He actually wrote a whole book where he claimed that that a source of his had some crucial information in a very, very famous case in Norway, a spy case which has been running for 25 years or something in Norway. But it all turned out to be fake. And he even wrote a book about it. So people just do some really strange things, even reporters.
Right. I have an incident to narrate actually. This is from my book on the 26/11 attacks, where journalists crossed the line without even knowing about it, and it actually led to the deaths of people. Because what happened was they were live reporting the incident, the terrorist attacks. They were giving a blow-by-blow account. They were in contact with the hostages inside the Taj. They didn't know that the terrorists had set up a control room back in Pakistan. They were monitoring the media, and they were telling the terrorists where to go because they had reported the location of the hostages, and it actually led to the deaths of a dozen hostages. That's terrible, and they did it entirely without knowing about it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the disadvantages of 24/7 news, the fact that everything is happening so quickly, and people are reporting things live, and you sometimes you just don't have the time to double check your sources. You just run with something because someone has told you something. So that is a problem. And my main character, he really hates the whole online news thing, even though he works for one. He's more of a classical paper journalist, really. He just likes to spend a lot of time getting to know his sources and getting his facts straight. And I think really more reporters should be like that.
We have a few minutes for questions. There are some. I see the lady there. Yes.
Hi, I have a question for Uday and one for, I'll be quick, Thomas. My question for Uday is, I was on the same crowdsourcing platform as you were, which actually helped you publish your book. So my question is, how important it was for you to make the first 3 chapters extremely interesting for the reader to kind of look forward to the rest of the book. And my question to Thomas is, how do you really make sure that the journey of the book, as in the research and your plot, is as interesting and as the end of the story? Because if I do not like the end of your book, I'm never going to come back and buy another book of yours. So yeah.
Yeah. So as you know, Pathakji also said, in the last session, a book should, a thriller especially, should take off like a jet. Unless you get into that novel within the first few pages, it is, nowadays readers don't have that much time. That's one thing which we have come to know. So you should be able to get into that book just like that. So there are few, authors internationally, mostly, for me, Michael Connelly. You just pick up his book and get into it very easily. So yeah, so it's very important that the initial chapters should be fast, and a reader should be able to connect with them and just get into the novel. Just don't know. Within an hour or so, you are through 10 or 15 chapters. It should be like that. It works for me. Probably that is something which made Brutal a success.
Okay, I'll try to answer your question. It's always important to have a good ending to a book, of course, because a start to a book can be just as it can be really intriguing and compelling, but if you don't explain why it's compelling towards the end, then everything just falls apart. It's like a deck of cards, a house of cards. If you just pull out one of the cards, the whole thing can just come crashing down. So, of course, when I write my novels, I really focus a lot on the ending. And because I've written a series where each novel, all 5 of them are somehow connected. Because there is this big arc going through the whole series where Henning, my main character, is trying to find his son's killer. That's the story that runs through the whole 5-book series. But each novel can stand firmly on their own feet. So I pay very close attention to that story in that book. But at the same time, I leave some crumbs here and there and some cliffhangers towards the end that drives the story forward. So if you read one of my books, I'm sure you'll find some cliffhangers on the end.
Any more questions? Okay. So I'd like to thank you again, Thomas. Uday, thank you for your time. Wonderful hearing your thoughts, and enjoy the festival.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that insight. Anybody that wants to get their book signed, the guests will be available for book signing right as you step outside this hall. Thank you again for that insight into a world of journalism, crime and law. A lethal cocktail, I must say, for books and life. With this, we break for tea. It will be a short break of 15 minutes. And tea is being served right at the back of the hall. If anyone wants to proceed to Cha Bar, that's also fine. We will regroup here at 12 noon sharp to begin the 3rd session for today. Thank you. Hello everyone. We will be beginning this session shortly, so I request all of you to kindly come back to your seats. Hello. We're ready to start with the next session. Just waiting for everybody at the back to come forward and take their seats. Also, I request all the newcomers and everyone who's just joined us to kindly put your cell phones on silent mode. And while you're at it, use hashtag #NoIR and geotag Oxford Bookstore. And do tweet and post about the event. Welcome back, co-conspirators. The third session for today is the other end of the row, where we discuss The Last Hangman, which is about the reflections of a man who is state-sanctioned to kill people, remembering the lives he has ended. We have with us Shashi Warrior in conversation with Anup Surendranath, talking about the writing of this convoluted theme in his celebrated work of literary fiction. Joining us also is Karuna Nandi.
So, for those of you who don't know Anup and Shashi, Shashi has written a fantastic book called The Hangman's Journal. And I'm going to let him speak in his own words because he's clearly more of a word person in the literary way. Anoop has been doing some amazing pioneering work on the death penalty. He's been looking at empirical data, he's been looking at stories. I think we're going to begin with a presentation by Anoop.
So I think I'll just very briefly talk about what I got from the book, The Hangman's Journal. And as somebody who spent 2.5 years interviewing death row prisoners across the country, still I thought there was so much for me to learn from the way Shashi has described Pujapura prison, where I have spent time interviewing the death row prisoners in Kerala, but the magnificent way in which the gallows in Pujapura prison and the entire ritual, the rituals and the practices around executing an individual, the way it's brought out, it really added a lot of richness to what I thought I had learned from interviewing the prisoners themselves. Quite a few of them were very close to being executed, but legal creativity and legal maneuvering has saved them for the time being. But I think in terms of the book, I think it asks some really difficult questions of us as a society in terms of the way we view crime, the way we view punishment, the way we view something like the death penalty. On whom does that burden, that moral burden, ultimately fall? And what the book in Sarfaz refers to as who does the dirty work, right? And it falls to this one individual who has to pull that lever at the end of the day, and has to put that black mask over that person's face. And the book is an interrogation of what that person feels in executing the will, beginning because the hangman is first the hangman in the Travancore kingdom and then of independent India. The questions he asks of what is he doing and why is he doing it, why he gets into this job, his own search for the moral justification, his struggle to morally justify to himself, and that of why he does what he's doing. And then through that, I think Shashi really asked some uncomfortable questions, some of which I'm sure we'll explore during the course of this conversation. But I'll just leave it here for now and then pick up some of the themes.
I think it might be interesting to hear a little bit about the sort of context of your work, you know?
So our work started a little after, a few months after Afzal Guru was executed. And our work was to try and understand who gets sentenced to death in India. What is the socio-economic profile of India's death row prisoners and how do they get the death penalty? For this, we interviewed all of India's death row prisoners across all states. We tracked down each of their families. We spoke to them. And in that sense is an academic, empirical work to understand that. And while everybody has this intuition that in any country that has the death penalty, it's the most marginalized sections that get the death penalty. We wanted to see to what extent that was true in the Indian context, and sure enough, it is the lower caste, it is the poor, it is the illiterate, it is, and by virtue of their poverty, it is the worst represented in courts that get the death penalty. And the kind of practices that go into the investigation in these cases, their experience of trial, and I think for me, at least personally, it gave me an understanding of. I think we can disagree till the cows come home on the philosophical aspects of the death penalty, and then we could end up on either side of that. But in a system like this, in a country like ours,
the punishment is just all the more cruel. It's all the more unjust because of how unfair it is, right? And there is no way to remedy that, right? Because the rot is so deep in the criminal justice system that and I think it does disservice to both the victims and the people who are trapped in that system, right? And I think one prisoner who actually was in Pujapuda really captured it most profoundly for me, right? And he was talking of the kind of custodial violence he suffered to get his confession in police custody, and he said the criminal justice system is like a cobweb, right? It's a cobweb that the instruments of the state spin around you, and it's only the small insects that get caught in it. The big ones burst through it, and the spider never gets caught in its own web, right? And I think it also taught me about the meaning of freedom. I mean, when I say meaning of freedom, I think on the outside we always assume morally that people want to just get out. It's not so easy. It's not so morally easy that no death penalty is always a good choice. That's what prisoners want. It's a very, very difficult, complex set of moral, emotional considerations when they are faced with the possibility that the courts can now ask them to spend the rest of their life in prison without any possibility of release, right? The morality of that, the difficulty of that choice, right? Very often for them, and I think our prisons are such closed institutions, we don't have access, and I think people like us who are sanitized from that experience, right? And it's very easy to have a certain understanding of what our prison system is about, and it's something that's extremely cruel. It lacks the most basic of facilities, and I think to ask somebody to spend the rest of their life in a system like that, for me, is no less cruel than taking their life. And for many of them, it was like, if that's what they want to offer me, I'd rather be executed. Right? Based on our work, we now litigate for many of them. We represent them in court, and we're now also doing a similar project on the mental health of death row prisoners.
I think that when Anup also speaks of a life sentence, then it's useful and interesting to put it in context, because very frequently when people say no death penalty, they say the easy argument then is to say, why not send people to jail for life, right? And I think one of the things that you were saying is quite compelling, which is that philosophically there are divides, and it's difficult to travel those divides. But I think as someone, I'm going to take a straw poll actually. How many of you believe in the death penalty? I think it's a good idea, and maybe that it's not, that the way it's implemented could be improved. This person there, as someone who used to believe that, and then traveled, right? I would say don't be afraid to raise your hand in this somewhat progressive crowd. So 2 people. Okay, so we are speaking to the converted here. 3 people, 1 more brave hand. Anyone else?
Let me share this. If I could put up half a hand, I would do that.
Okay, so this is an interesting, Shashi, I think that, the bulk of the sort of interest really is in your book, right? And I think to me, one of the most interesting questions, and I would love for you to talk about why you still raise half a hand. But to me personally, one of the most interesting questions is the idea of responsibility. Because here we have someone who's at the last mile of taking the life, right? At the first mile, you have the bench, perhaps. Or is it the law? Or is it the first bench that allowed the rarest of rare? In the rarest of rare cases for a murderer to be executed? Or is it the failure of the Joint Secretary, who then did the first draft of the Criminal Law Amendment Bill 2013,
saying that in particular cases of rape, a person can be sentenced to death without making it explicit that it is in the list of rape cases, right? So when in the law we have this minus terrible.
In the law, we have ideas of command responsibility, right? When we have ideas in war, for instance, for war crimes, for crimes against humanity, where we have the idea that general is as responsible as the guy who pulls the trigger. When we have in tort law for damages the idea of joint and several responsibility. You know, even in the Reader, right? Very much like very interestingly to me, sort of explore this idea of, you know, if you're low down in the Nazi system, you know,
if you're low down as a professional officer in the SS, then what is your responsibility? And I think for me also it's interesting because here we are in a system that, in a political system that strands of which I see as fascist, you know? And strands of which, yes, and I could defend that, you know, with reference to Gramsci, I could defend that with reference to classical ideas of fascism. What is our individual responsibility? You know, so, but yeah, you were saying that you'd raise half a hand.
Let me first tell you a little story. It's in the book. And it's actually, it's not a story, it's a bit of history. In the kingdom of Travancore, you know, the day used to be measured from sunrise to sunrise, not from midnight to midnight, in the old days. And whenever a man was, it was always a man, women were never sentenced to death. Whenever a man was sentenced to death, the judge pronounced a date on which he would be hanged. The prison staff, working on the principle that this guy deserves as much life as possible, would try to execute him just before dawn, that is just before the end of the term that the judge defined, just before dawn. Now, Travancore, the kings of Travancore were very religious. They believed in Vishnu, right? And one of Vishnu's principles is no work between sundown and sunrise. So at night you put your books away, you put away all your stuff and go to bed or whatever it is. So there would be these mercy petitions. Whenever there was an execution lined up, there would be a mercy petition which was addressed. Okay, can you hear me at the back? I'm sorry about that. Okay. You can? Great. There would be a mercy petition sent to the king. And the king would always sign the petition, saying, yes, this guy can be pardoned. And he would sign the thing, he would sign the paper just before dusk, just before sunset. It wouldn't be possible for that paper to be sent to the prison in time to save the prisoner from being hanged. And typically the messenger from the king's palace would arrive at the prison with the signed pardon document, just as the prisoner's body was being cut down from the gallows. And, you know, the messenger would say, look, this is not my fault because I'm not supposed to work between sunset and sunrise, right? It's not the king's responsibility because the king pardoned the criminal. He has no problem. It's not the prison staff's responsibility because they didn't get the petition on time. So the responsibility for, like, you know, there's a very good question she asked. The responsibility for the killing rests on the hangman. So the hangman carries the responsibility for the rest of society. That is a terrible burden to put on any single person. That's the point of view from which I wrote this book. Okay. So let's now look at, you know, Karna, you were talking about responsibility. In the first place, it's very difficult to pinpoint responsibility. And I would like to go back much further than you were talking about 2013 and so on. It's not just that, it's also the other bits of governance. We can't talk about death penalty without looking at the penal system and without looking at the government that operates, the quality of governance and the society in which that government operates. There's no point in asking this question without looking at the whole context. However, let me give you a direct answer to your question about half a hand. The only reason why I would support keeping the death penalty on the books, I'm not saying using it, but keep it on the books to save life. If you have, say, a person who kills for ideological or religious reasons, He has financial, moral, political support outside the prison. And supports violence as a means of getting what he wants. I think we should consider the death penalty. That's one kind of case that I'm talking about. The purpose of this is to save lives. Now, if you let a terrorist out of jail and he kills somebody, what are you going to say to him? I personally, I wouldn't be able to face somebody like that. And there is history. We have a history of that sort of thing happening. There was Maulana Masood Azhar, who was released in the wake of the IC 814 kidnapping, and who has plotted several terrorist incidents in the recent past. What do you say to people who've lost people in those events? It's a tricky question. It's one time.
So
let's
hold our horses on that point.
Another possibility. We have no way. Arup was saying that among the commoner cases of death penalty transition nowadays is the rape and murder of children. What happens if you convict a pedophile? He goes through his prison term, he gets time off for 14 years after the beginning of his life sentence. He's back on the streets and he repeats his crime. We have no way, and let me say this at the outset, we have no way to evaluate the possibility. We have no way to evaluate the possibility of a person repeating a crime, a horrible crime like this. But if you can save the life of one child by killing a criminal who might repeat his crime, I think we should consider that as well. These are the grounds on which I raised half a hand.
I think this is a really interesting perspective, Shashi. And I think you're actually speaking not from a philosophical level, you're actually speaking at a sort of consequentialist level, right? Now the thing is that I suppose I have three questions. One is that how do you, and it would be nice if you address them, and address any other questions that you frame also. One is that how do you decide whether it is ideological or not? Because I'm presuming what you're saying is that that's something that does not then reform once you leave the system, because you're presuming here that there's a possibility of leaving the system. Do we presume that, for example, do we presume, for instance, that pedophilia and the killing of children is an ideological thing? Do we say that because you are, or maybe that was a separate point. Do we say that because you believe in a certain kind of violent jihad, or because you believe in a certain kind of violent Hindutva that involves blowing people up, that unless you have been proven to have discarded that ideology, you'll be put to death? Are we saying that the state identifies people who will not kill people well enough so that there isn't a positive, there isn't a negative or positive error there? Are we saying that targeting by the state and that investigation is specific enough, right? And also are we saying that the state sort of provides the ability for a person to reform, right? Before we come to Anoop, there's also, I think, one earlier, as an aside, there was one earlier point you made about the responsibility of others. One thing I found is that when there is some kind of egregious crime, for example, in 2012, where the young woman on the bus was killed, a lot of people were coming out on the street and saying, we want the death penalty. You had politicians saying, kill the murderers, kill the rapists, right? And that's the easiest thing to say. And I think those people actually have quite a lot of responsibility here too, because once we proposed alternatives, there were enough people that moved, that traveled, as I did and as others have, from the pro-death penalty perspective to seeing that not only is it not a deterrent, that the state frequently gets it wrong,
right? And kills innocent people. That even in our present structure, we have judgments by which one judge on the bench has found the person to be innocent. The evidence is at best circumstantial. And the person has been in jail for years and years and years and then become mentally ill. You know?
Just a couple of points to again respond to. But again, interestingly, in the book, you Shashi talks of Janardhan Pillai, the hangman, being extremely uncomfortable with certain kinds of execution, with certain kinds of punishment, and when confronted with those, in trying to understand who he is as an individual, he says, "I wouldn't do that." There are certain things, certain forms of really violent punishments discussed in the book, which he says, I wouldn't do that, right? So there's clearly for Janardhan Pillai, the hangman, a gradation of cruelty which is acceptable and cruelty which is not acceptable, right? And he finds the execution by hanging, and then he draws his experience is very different when the hanging results in death by snapping of the neck, as opposed to asphyxiation, where that really troubles him clearly in the book, when one of his executions results in death by asphyxiation and not by snapping of the neck. He really struggles with that. So there's a question that socially we become accustomed to certain kinds of cruelty and torture. To be, in that sense, as a society now comfortable with this form of punishment. In the United States, they said, okay, let's have lethal injections. But we've seen how that has gone horribly wrong in the last year, and the challenge going to the US Supreme Court on the constitutionality of lethal injections. So I would like to comment on that in terms of the gradation of cruelty that we become accustomed to as a society and find acceptable. Second, in terms of the point that Karuna was addressing, in terms of how do we look at crimes? And I think the Gurukul, the priest, in trying to make Janardhan Pillai understand his own role, says, why don't you view the people that you were executing as pests of society? Right? And your role is that you have been eliminating the pests of society, the 117 people you have executed. He expresses doubt only about one of them, and he says, these are people who did, and yes, in the cases we do, the really tough cases to handle in court are the child rape and murder cases, right? And before I was discussing with Shashi as to, it really comes down to how do we view crime? How do we view the Delhi gang rape case? How do we view those individuals? Do we view those individuals as in those sense, individual rotten apples where we can eliminate them and then society will be safer? Right? Clearly not. I mean, the problem of child rape and murder or rape and murder generally is not going to be addressed by eliminating certain individuals.
Why not? Why not?
Yeah, and because I think it's the problem of sexual violence and gender violence is a lot more sociological, is a lot more systemic, and is going to continue to happen. And I think it's very easy for the state to direct the anger that victims face and supporters and anybody who's I mean, when we defend people who've been accused of and convicted of child rape and murder, we are not defending child rape and murder. Okay, I mean, I assume that's you can take that on good faith that the defense is not of the act, right? But how do we view this crime, right? And I don't think eliminating people is going to solve the problem. For the state, it's easy to direct the anger towards the individual. That's the easy political situation, to say that you need to focus your anger on this individual or these set of 4 people and not really on what the state has failed to do. And in that sense, victims' justice needs to be looked at as the failure of the state. Victims' justice cannot be looked at as a question of revenge against the individual. And I think very often we run into that trap, that victims' justice is always equated to exacting revenge on the individual who has committed that offense. And I think that's where I start to question that on how we view the context of death penalty and sexual violence. And on Shashi's point of if the death sentence of a child rapist and murderer is commuted, right? And let's say the life imprisonment simpliciter is given, which is, let's say, in some states 16 years, some states 18 years, and this person is let out. Is there a risk of reoffending? Of course, there's a risk of reoffending. I'm absolutely on board with Shashi that there is a risk of reoffending. But the disagreement having earlier was also that it is a failure of your prison system. If you look at your prison system, there is nothing in your prison system to change anybody who goes into that system. In terms of investment, in terms of programs, in terms of how you approach reformation in prisons, there's nothing to change it. So Shashi's point is extremely valid. And I think as people who work on the death penalty, there has to be an answer to that. What about risk of reoffending? And for me, unfortunately, I only have a philosophical position in response, is to say that it's unjustified, I think, to take the life of one individual because the state cannot protect future victims. Right? And Shashi, right? And in that sense, if the state cannot protect, and of course, I'm not trying to make the future set of victims some abstract notion. Clearly, the risk is real, but it just is, I think, I find it philosophically problematic to say that I will use the life of one individual to save the lives of others, because as a state, I can't do anything.
A last question to you, very briefly. Do you think it's okay if the is there a problem with this mic? Is there a problem with this mic? No? No? Do you think then that it's okay, given that the system is broken down, given that there are future victims out there, to put somebody in jail for life if they are likely to reoffend and likely to kill people?
Right. Now, I think this whole reoffending question is complex, and our prisons, I agree with Shashi, are incapable of addressing it. But I really share the view that, and again, I don't have answers that Shashi will inevitably ask. I think life imprisonment without the possibility of release is just as cruel, right? I don't think it's any victory for death penalty abolitionists to say, okay, now we're going to reduce the death penalty and we're going to keep more and more people.
But it's a very specific question here,
right?
You know, which is, on the one hand, so we're making very difficult choices here, right? And we struggle with these choices in the juvenile justice system all the time. Where I diverge with you very strongly is that although it's true that rapists have, for example, a hugely disproportionate history of child abuse, right?
Yeah.
I disagree with you that there is no individual responsibility, that everything can be foisted on the state. I mean, I think there's so for example, in juvenile justice, the way we think about it is we think about justice as reformative. We think about individual responsibility and taking responsibility, right? And then we look at sort of something of a mediator.
I was trying to counter the narrative that,
and also we should come to
just that we need to view child rapists and murderers as the only explanation of this is that it's some individual evil inside me that makes me a child rapist and murderer. That can't be the way you explain this. And
I think we are.
So, let me state my position very clearly. One is, there is no real moral justification for the state killing anyone. Number one. Number two is, we cannot afford a vengeful state. A vengeful state that says, you killed someone, we're going to kill you back. We cannot afford a system like that, like the one Hammurabi got up. We can't do that. The only doubt in my mind is, the only question in my mind is, can we save the lives of people, specifically children? One question arising from this is, what is the value that the state puts on the life of the average citizen? As far as I can make out, our government doesn't value the life. The government thinks the average citizen is cheap, except when it comes to collecting votes. The rest of the time, your citizen is about as valuable as a bucket of spit. But we also need to look at this prevention bit a little deeper. Is there any way to decide, to judge the possibility of a child rapist repeating his offense? That's why I'm saying we should keep the death penalty on the table. We should consider it. I'm not saying we should implement it. And the reason is, if we can, in the short term, at least evolve some way of judging whether a guy will go out and do that crime again, maybe we should do something different. That is one very specific thing in my mind. Two is this thing about terrorism. I understand. If you look at large parts of, for example, the Maoist protests, the Maoist killings, I've actually met people in Odisha who have seen villages full of women being raped 25 years back. So youngsters of that time grew up to be Maoist. Is that so surprising? Personally, I'm not surprised. I might not sympathize with the methods they use, but I do sympathize with the feelings that they've had at the time they've seen these horrendous things. Okay, so I'm not sure because there's no element of vengeance in what I'm saying. The only question in my mind is, if by executing somebody who's a convicted felon on the basis of a proper judicial process, what do we do? What do we do? If be it a terrorist or a pedophile, whatever it is, or a Maoist, whatever it is, shouldn't we in a lousy system like ours, where the prison system holds no possibility of reform, where you can't even get numbers on how many prisoners repeat their offences after their release. There's no way you can get that kind of what would be a fairly simple number. You just can't get it. In a system that is so hopelessly unprepared to deal with crime, don't we consider saving lives important?
On that note, let's open it up to questions and comments, but please keep it brief. Let's just say everyone has got their hands raised. Organizer's privilege. We'll go with you first.
Thank you. So I noticed through the talk that there was a sort of a divide between a crime being committed by the perpetrator versus thinking of the social conditioning that caused that perpetrator to be, and holding that conditioning or the socioeconomic atmosphere responsible for whatever crime is being committed. And that sort of seems to me to be at somewhat one of the basis for not being in favor of the death penalty. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. So somewhat. So my question is that until and unless, and this is sort of in line with what Shashi was saying, until and unless the state finds itself in a position to say that we can protect you, and until and unless we find, say, a reformative prison system that actually works, is it justified to keep death penalty up until that for lack of simply any other alternative?
What's your name?
Sushruti Tripathi.
So we'll take 2 or 3 questions and then the panel will respond.
Yeah, actually, I also have the same question that he put. Most pedophiles do repeat. Not that they generally don't, they generally do. And another thing is that in a country like ours, which is so complex, when you have a terrorist who is to be executed, there's huge amounts of protest happening. And if terrorists, and we've seen that they again do repeat.
Like when? So you're thinking of Yaqub Memon's funeral?
No, not the funeral, also when even Afzal Guru was in jail. Then there were constant protests, and in fact the whole of the state is on fire. So I personally think end it. Because this is a man who has shown no respect for life. It's not vengeance. It is, and again, this is a separate problem. I agree we must sensitize men, we must sensitize people, and I wish we had a wonderful world. We don't. And we are never going to have a wonderful world till poverty, goes down dramatically in this country.
Okay.
So in this case, we cannot keep blaming everything on socioeconomic factors and childhood neglect.
Let's go to the
through in a spirit of vengeance, but just in a spirit of protecting the rest of society.
Okay, got it, ma'am. Thank you.
I just have a comment. I guess I might get a flag for this, but I strongly believe, irrespective of which side of law you are, no human being has a right to take another human being's life. So I'm kind of absolutely against death penalty. And it has been proven that if you put death penalty for rapists, you are bound to ensure that the guy who rapes will kill. Because if the conviction is the same, that you will be hanged or whatever.
The sentence increases.
So the sentence will be the same.
What's your name, sir? What's your name, ma'am?
Bish.
Three questions and actually a lot of ideas already, right? To me, the most controversial is the Afzal Guru, but let's go down. Shashi?
Okay. Afzal Guru again. I personally don't believe that due judicial process was followed in this case. I don't know about Karuna's answer.
I agree with that completely.
If judicial process was not followed, it's very clear he shouldn't have been executed. There's absolutely no question. That is the absolute minimum that has to be granted a person before this. Okay, so there is absolutely no question in my mind that Afzal Guru should not have been executed. So that takes care of one of the things. No question about blaming the putting the responsibility, taking the responsibility away from the person, from the criminal, to the circumstances that he lived through. Is that justified? It is not justified. Let's get this clear again. On moral grounds, there is no justification for the death penalty. If I had the money, if I had the means to do this, I would abolish the death penalty completely, and at the worst, have people spend the rest of their natural lives in prison. I have absolutely no problem with that. But the thing is that our prison system is so lousy, and it is expensive. You have what, 200, something like 250 million people going to bed hungry in this country every day. How civilized is it to give more consideration to the life of a convicted? I'm assuming that due judicial process is being followed in everything that I say. Okay, if the process is screwed up, no death penalty. Absolutely not. I find it difficult to answer this question. Is it? If I were in government, would I spend more on keeping one convicted criminal alive than on feeding something of the order of 1,000 people who can't earn a living but are perfectly law-abiding? It's a difficult question, and I'm quite happy if there is dissent. If you disagree, terrific. I'm doubtful. I don't know. Okay, I really don't know. But these are the questions. These are the questions that arise from your question. तीसरा क्या था?
तीसरा comment था where he said that on moral grounds, I have absolutely no dissent on that. We should not. The state should not kill. It should not be vengeful. There is no problem with that. But it should be on the books. But then it should, no. In present conditions, yes, it must be on the books. I am looking forward to a society where we can take it off the books. But if a pedophile is released after his sentence and kills another 2-year-old girl, I would find that a bigger weight on my conscience than it's a judgment thing. It's just judgment. There's nothing more to it. Okay, I don't know. And if you think differently, I wouldn't blame you for it. I wouldn't say you value a killer's life more than that of a people. I'm not taking that route. Yes.
I think very often the discussion that we have around this and a very important qualification that Shashi gave of due process, right? It rarely happens in these high-profile cases that the process is fair, right? And I can't communicate that to you sufficiently because unless you literally go down to see what evidence is collected, who said what, how was the investigation done, how was this person treated, how was this person, his confession taken, you really cannot understand the crisis in the system. So you make a huge assumption in these cases that process is followed. Now let's assume that process is followed. Ma'am, Gitanjali ma'am, let's assume that everything is followed. We have and it's a terrorism case. And I think we really need to treat terrorism as a separate category, because martyrdom changes the debate, right? At the House of Commons, when it was considering the death penalty at the height of the conflict in Northern Ireland, specifically said we don't want the death penalty, right? Because it really does not begin to address, if your issue is prevention, death penalty for terrorism does not begin to address the issue.
Lots of data.
Right? But however, society might well have a legitimate interest in saying we want revenge. Now that's a call we have to take, right? Whether you're comfortable doing that, and I would only say that we are a society that's comfortable, and that's the challenge that we face in our work. We are a society that's comfortable with summary executions, with extrajudicial killings. Death penalty on that spectrum, for me, is in that sense, a 5-star problem, right? You know, the kind of things, the excesses that are committed. This problem is, and that's why it's so difficult to engage, because as a society, we are so conditioned to accept and normalize such excesses. This becomes like, you know, what are you talking about, right?
You know, I think that there's a hardening effect also. There are studies that show that there is a hardening effect, quite apart from on society. That in some cases, and I think there's a study in Georgia which shows that there's an increase in crime that results from the death penalty. There's also a multitude of studies that show that it is not a deterrent. Not a deterrent. Now, this is something to remember. You know, Sukriti's point, I think, is interesting, which is that I do think that in our jurisprudence, we do need to bring in evidence, data, empirical evidence, assessments from psychiatrists and psychologists, right? Where there's an assessment of responsibility. Of course, it would be inaccurate, but I think it would be great if we had more of this before judges at the sentencing stage to argue mitigation, right? Also, you know, to Shashi's point, which is that it should remain on the books. Now, Anup has made the due process point extremely well, which is that, look, our criminal justice system is broken down. There are no two ways about it. We work in it. It's difficult. We work to improve it, you know, in our own individual ways. But it is broken down. So when we think of due process, when we think of the standard of rarest of rare, the rarest of rare can apply to the rape of one person, the murder of one person, or a mass killer, you know? So it's completely arbitrary. This is still, and I'm going to end with actually sort of seeing if anyone has, let Shashi have the last word, but before that, I'm going to ask the people who still wanted the death penalty, who believe in the death penalty, when we started out, if their views have changed at all. Does anyone want to speak about that very, very quickly? Would you like to speak about that a little bit?
But all I can say is that
No, please go on. Actually, she started speaking, she volunteered.
Okay. No, so all I can say is, as a country or as a common person, we're extremely emotional. You know, so something like a December 16 happens, or any other crime, you know, it kind of hurts you. So the most you know, obvious reaction is that yes, that person should die. But at the same time, I mean, I'm speaking for myself, that I understand that the whole process is very skewed. And I know, I mean, I felt that sadness, and, you know, I could be sort of, you know, taken wrong here. But, for example, Ajmal Kasab, you know, he was hanged. I felt sad, not because of the crime that he's done, but because I knew that he was just a pawn. Why aren't we after people who've made Ajmal Kasab what he is? So, you know, yes, I mean, I do agree that yes, there should be death penalty, but only if it was implemented a little better. Yeah.
And if it's not, then no death penalty.
Yes, of course.
okay.
Okay, let me get a perspective on this. Yeah. The real question is, is, where do we draw the line? What is an acceptable level of cruelty? Be it death or be it something. What is an acceptable level of punishment that we can inflict on a criminal, assuming that judicial process has been followed? I don't have an answer to that. And the only small justification for keeping the death penalty in the books is my, what you call a consequentialist answer. Can we save lives? Can it be used to save a life? It seems very weird. It's like, sending a peacekeeping force, which is a contradiction in terms, because force doesn't make the peace. But if there is the faintest chance of saving a life by killing someone, well, can we think about it? Also, there's something else, a specific thing about the data that both of you brought up on the death penalty and martyrdom. Okay, I don't have any data from India. All the data that we are talking about has come from other countries which are much richer, which have much better systems. In India, we don't have any answers to that. There's no database answer to this. Number one. Number two is, when you have jihad/Hindutva/Maoist factories operating, one martyr more or less might not make a difference. Might not make a difference. I'm not saying it won't make a difference. I'm not saying it will make a difference, but I think the effect will be negligible. If you look at the relative value that the state and the people give to life, it's very different here than it is in Ireland. So, I think we'll wind up with it. Thank you very much. I personally thank you very much for being here. Thank you for spending your time. One last word. Of the three of us, I am the least qualified to say anything about the death penalty. These two have both.
I'd like to thank all the panelists for this really engaging and thought-provoking discussion. Shashi Warrior will be available for book signing right outside at the book signing desk. Also, later in the day, we have the workshop on crime writing, the jail word workshop, and the screening of the movie Bonnie and Clyde and Antisocial HKD. With that, we move on to the next session for today, Chinks in the Armor. Flawed protagonists, anti-heroes, and imperfect crime solvers add interest to any whodunit or crime thriller. We have with us Italian writer Giampaolo Sini and Abhi Barua speak of their less than heroic main characters. Can you please have them on stage?
Well, you have, essentially this is going to be a conversation with Giampaolo, who's really the star here. And I am here because I wrote a debut novel where the detective or the protagonist was had a drug problem, was an alcoholic, and so on and so forth. But Giampaolo is far more accomplished as a writer, as a both of novels, as a television screenwriter, as a critic, and so on. And I think we have a lot to learn about Italian crime fiction. I think we know enough about British crime writing. We know about Americans. I think there is quite a bit of awareness. Would I be correct in saying that there is now a lot of awareness about Nordic fiction, care of Mr. Larson and Mr. Nesco. So I'm going to digress a little from the central the theme of this conversation and ask Giampaolo to fill us in
little bit on, we are aware of some of the Italian great sort of crime writers like Camilleri and Salvo Montalbano's creation. But I understand that there is a fairly active sort of noir movement among young writers who are getting a lot of attention, and I presume that includes you. So could you just sort of fill us in a little bit?
I'm not very young, but
Well, I'm very.
First of all, thank you, and thank to NOIR Festival for this invitation. I'm very glad to be here, and in Italy we have a strange name for the crime fiction, which is a color, it's yellow, and no one understands us when we are abroad, because it was the color of the covers back in 29, and that the first publishing company of crime fiction in Italy chose for its books. So we said, when there's a mystery in Italy, we said there's yellow, and it's very strange. And the yellow and the color covers from all the kind of crime fiction, from spy to detective to mystery, for example, and maybe sometimes even supernatural. If you know, I think some of you know a director like Dario Argento, who was very popular in the 70s, and he was a typical example of a genre which mix all these things. In the last 15 years, Italian giallo, Italian crime fiction has, I think, the 60% of all the book market in Italy. Only in the 20 years, in the last 20 years, it's been a complete revolution. Because I remember when I first started in 90, maybe 97, 98, I started to gather some friends, some writer friends, and started to discuss about noir fiction in Italy. We were normally 10 people, 12 people, and no one thought that an Italian crime fiction scene would flourish. And just 2 years after, it was all completely different. So we have, I think that in Italy we like to tell stories with a mystery, with normally a murder in the beginning. But there are stories that must allow us to describe a city, describe, for example, a part of Rome, to describe Naples, for example, which has become very popular in the last year in Italy. You have many writers feel that they want to have time to describe a city or a part of the city, and it's been just like that. The examples are Romanzo Criminale, which is a great novel about Rome, about the power in Rome. About a famous mafia gang who ruled Rome for 20 years maybe. And it's true about Saviano's work. Saviano is not a crime fiction writer, but from his Gomorrah, a crime, an epic saga of a mafia gang has started. And it's been seen all over the world. So it's very complicated,
And I think we have a great variety of writing styles. For example, I don't write about mafia gangs or war between.
I just quickly come to that. I thought I should have mentioned this to you that it's a pity that I don't think any of Giampaolo's works are available in English. I have
Unfortunately,
read,
no.
Unfortunately, and I hope they'll be translated soon and we get to read them. What I would want him to do, before we sort of get to the issue of the flawed anti-hero crime fighter, the torment, the damage, and so on, and this is what Giampaolo was getting to. The two things that I want him to do is give us a little flavor of the kind of stories, because what he seemed to suggest and what he said is that it's not the conventional, crime, model that is, predominant across Italy. And there are different kinds of things, from mystery to, stories about the mob and so on. So I would like, Giampaolo, if you could, just give us a flavor of what kind of stories you like to tell. And since you said that people like to describe the places they live in, and so obviously there are influences of where they live, the geography, the culture, and so on. And Giampaolo lives in Tuscany, which is one of those beautiful parts of Italy. But it also has a sort of a murky underbelly. So if you could talk both about your work as well as the influence of Tuscany on your writing.
Yes. First of all, about my last two novels, for example. And it was 5 years ago, and I decided to write a crime story, but I didn't want to put the murder in the first page. I decided that the murder was at the last pages. And it was unconventional. But I thought that I wanted to write a story just like that, because I wanted the victim to be with us during all the book, because I wanted that we really would have cried seeing her dead. That was unconventional, and it was a book who didn't get to any crime fiction prize because it was too unconventional. It was 2012, 5 years ago. In the same time, Gillian Flynn was writing, for example, Gone Girl, which is a crime story, very unconventional and very set into the most intimate relationship between a man and a woman. And I felt that was my kind of story, but sometimes it happens to be too early. And my book in 2012, in my opinion, didn't accomplish what it deserved. But only 3 years after, in 2015, I published my last book, which is translated in English, sounds just like What's Left of Us. And then I thought that I want the murder just in the middle of the book, because I think that a crime fiction writer could decide to put the murder in the center of the book, in the physical center of the book and the attention. And so I wrote this a little bit unconventional book, and it sold so many copies, more than the previous, with, I swear, with my surprise. In only 2-3 years, the taste of the readers has changed. It's changed very rapidly, and so now it's totally acceptable that you get a crime fiction book and you don't have the murder in the first page. Maybe you will meet this crime in the just page 100, or in the end, it's not a problem anymore for the reader. So sometimes it happens you get too early. So
can I just interrupt here and ask you whether, since you mentioned Flynn and Gone Girl and the kind of sort of somewhat experimental writing you've done, is sort of the conventional model of the crime fighter, the flawed crime fighter, the Harry Hole, Rebirth, or Montalbano, is that sort of going out of fashion? Are readers looking more and more towards these unconventional formats of the crime novel, which deviates from the classic, murder detection and the torment within the detective who's exposed to so much of humankind's underbelly?
Yes. I think that the Italian scene has become a less procedural. I think you understand. There's no because we had, of course, we had Montalbano and so many detectives similar to Montalbano, because Montalbano was very successful. So there was a rush to emulate Camilleri, but that was 20 years ago. Now the times have changed a lot, and so every time we try to write about or make a feature film about the power fight between two powerful mafia gangs. We had Sergio Leone on our back. We had Once Upon a Time in America, and it's very hard to escape from that comparison. So we think, as I said before, it's time to investigate the most intimate relationships. Maybe learning from the French school, the French noir school, which is very important for me. And so there's no need to have a mafia boss and gangs. There's no need to have the classical detective, and there's no need to have the powerful mafia boss who is evil, but is fascinating at the same time, of course. And so, should we talk about Tuscany? Maybe
I'm sorry, I didn't let you talk about Tuscany.
I've heard the previous session, and what came in my mind is that in Tuscany we celebrate the November 30 as our Tuscany Day, because in 1786 Peter Leopold, Archduke of Tuscany, banned the death penalty as a first state in the whole world. And so you will ask me, how it is possible to write crime fiction in Tuscany, which seems very, it is a very beautiful place, and it's home of the Renaissance, and so you can think it's not like Norway, and just said Thomas before, but it's very close to perfection, a perfect place to live. So, what about crime stories in Tuscany? Let me say that the Greek said, kalos kai agathos. What is beautiful cannot be bad. It has to be good. It's not always like that. I've studied Greek culture, but unfortunately, it's not always like that. Tuscany is the example it's a place where the beauty and the crime are going around together. Because Tuscany, for example, has been the scenery of one of the most grimly stories of all time about a serial killer. And if anyone of you, if anyone has seen the sequel of the Hannibal Lecter saga, there was a part of the film was shot in Florence because Hannibal Lecter wanted to reconnect with the monster of Florence, the famous monsters of Florence. I say monsters because we are certain that there was not a crime committed only by one person, even if only one person has been convicted, at least of 4 of 8 double murders. A very strange and dark stories because the murders spread from 68 to 86, almost 2 decades. And it's very strange because usually serial killers tend to accelerate the rhythm of their crimes, and it didn't happen. So it's a very strange and dark story, and it all set up on the perfectly shaped hills of Tuscany, between vineyards, between the cypresses in a row, just all that you know about Tuscany. You know, it exists, it is real. But in this sweet scenery, there was blood. There was blood everywhere for 2 decades. And I remember the only person convicted for 4 of the 8 murder was a peasant, was a humble person. He was short and he was stubborn, and he didn't seem very clever, but in my opinion he was. And I remember during the process, and he stood up and he wanted to talk to the court and said, remember, I'm a peasant, I'm just a peasant. I work, he said something, it's not easily translated in English, but I work bent to the ground all the time because I'm a peasant. And remember, the ground is low. The ground is low. You have to bend to work the ground. And when you work the ground, you are looking towards the kingdom of the dead. It was for me a very strong sentence that reminds us that all that you see in Tuscany has been made by man during centuries of fight against nature. It's a nature shaped by violence, by man, and I always remember it's so beautiful, but remember the ground, to work the ground you have to bend.
I'm going to interrupt you again and ask you a question that, in a sense, a lot of us see crime fiction as a documentation of the social problems, the tensions, either in an urban landscape or in a society and so on. And the conventional, crime fighter, mafia boss, or killer format, I think help to document this fairly effectively. Help to document this very effectively because it gave you a template. But now that you're sort of, slowly moving away and people are experimenting with alternative formats, which I think are far more personal, far more intimate and so on. Again, I'm thinking of Gillian Flynn, I'm thinking of whatever I read of some of your work, which will get a little more personal and intimate and not social commentary in that sense. Is crime fiction, is there a risk of crime fiction losing that role of being also simultaneously a sort of a commentary of the times that we live in and the tensions that society faces?
Personally, I don't think so, because what happens in our houses, between our four walls, it is connected with all that happens outside our house. I think many things can be understood by watching, by a close watching of a family, of a family's life, more than trying to picture a great fresco of my family. I don't personally. I don't like novels with many characters and with many points of view. Maybe I will change my mind tomorrow, but now I need to take 4 or 5 characters and stay with them and make my reader stay with them all the time, to know them very well as I know them. And that's the kind of novel I like nowadays. And I don't think that by, for example, moving from crime fiction, we can, I can remember the famous book by Stoner, by John Williams, which is the story of a normal man. Nothing shocking happens. It's a story of his family and of his marriage and so on. I think it's a social book. There's no need to stand up on a hill and just to see all the scenery. Sometimes you can stay in a house and tell what's happening between 4 walls, and it's very important and it's very political in my.
Gianpaolo, since we have a time constraint, I'm going to get to my next question, which is: you write both for television and you write novels, short stories, and so on. This is the golden age, I think, of crime television, which is having fascinating stuff. I've been fascinated by what is now available on television from diverse parts of the world, Latin America, Europe, and so on. What gives you more satisfaction? What helps you, bring out your characters, more fully? Do you like the support of a visual medium like television, or are you happier writing a novel?
Of course, that's my experience. It's not easy to be in Italy. It doesn't exist the role called showrunner. Showrunner is the person, is the author who follows his series from the beginning to the end, and he can say his word about everything. And that's not something similar in Italy. There's not yet, maybe. So you can't control what will become your script, because the director, of course, has his opinion, and he will change it, maybe. The actors, the producers, everyone try to change the things you write, and maybe they see something you didn't ever imagine. I think that books are more satisfactory for me now, because you're the author, you're the only author, and you're responsible for success or failing, of course. I don't like to write something and think that someone else could be responsible for the failing, because it's not fair. You can say it, of course, but for a TV series, it needs a very skilled team of people who worked together in the same direction. And it's not very easy to find them in Italy now. So I think that when we write something for TV, we try to give an idea of what the final product will be. We're not responsible, so we just write, get paid, and see what's happening.
Right. I'm going to sort of end. We just have less than 5 minutes, and I sort of allow a couple of questions after that. But I want to ask you a most personal, private question. Gianpaolo is also a musician. He plays lead guitar in a band called the Flying Circus. And we had a very interesting chat last evening about the relationship between his playing music and his ability to write. And the fact that it was the first time he faced a writer's block was the same time that he had given up playing. So, why don't you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was in 2006 maybe. I decided to give up playing because hard rock session of 3 hours started to be a little tiring. And for 3 or 4 years, I gave up. And for the first time in my life, I experienced the writer's block. And I didn't understand. I had a good story to write. I had a publisher. I had a contract, a signed contract, but I had a block too as well. And so I had a little incident. A little injury on my knee, so I can go running, and I couldn't go running. I could go playing football, and I had some spare time. And some friends of mine said, "Come to play with us, just for slide." And it's nothing serious. It's nothing serious, but since that time, the writer's block vanished. Yeah, and in my opinion, it's happened because music has a healing power. We all know that. It's mysterious healing power. And some say that writing has a healing power, but in my opinion, I don't write to heal myself. I don't write to make a kind of autotherapy on myself. I write to be understood by others and to tell something important to the others and to be understood. So maybe to write, I have to know how I feel, and music tells me how I feel. So first I have to play, and then I can write. But playing is not my job. It's just.
I asked you this question essentially as for aspiring writers like me. I mean, how do you unwind? How do you get past the writer's block? And these are the critical issues that one grapples with when one is writing. So it's interesting to hear other people's experience, especially from a seasoned writer like you. I think we've pretty much come to the end of the discussion, and why don't we have some questions for Gianpaolo on music, on crime fiction, on Tuscany
wine,
Chianti.
I'm not a sommelier. I understand.
Yeah, but what's a good year for a Chianti? Can we have some questions? Do we have a little more time or?
Yes, just a bit on the side of cliché. Do you also play football? But you have played the football with the national team of Italian writers. This is true, yeah? And this is part of your experience.
We all know that, you all know that football is very popular in Italy, in Europe too, and so we started to think, it was 15 years ago, we started to think that writing can be a very lonely job, because you write on your own and you're always on your own. And at that time, there was not so many festivals and meetings about writing. So we decided to gather and to meet and to have maybe 15, 18, 20 writers together in a place. We like to play football, but after the football match, we started talking about writing, about our books, our ideas, our plans. And so it was very, very, very interesting, because working on a team, playing in a team, is something that a writer does not experience every day, because you work all alone, you work on your own. So to be a part of a team is to be responsible for others. Me, I play as a central back, so I am responsible for defense. So I'm always shouting at my teammates for the calling for positions, and so it was very, very interesting, and so I think I've learned many things on writing, playing football, even if I'm not so good playing football, and I would like to end this session with something that a football trainer told me once upon a time. I asked him, who is a real champion? Who is a real champion? And he thought, and he said, a real champion is a player who makes every time, which makes in the right way every time the most simple thing, which makes in the right way the most simple thing every time. When I read, for example, a writer just like Georges Simenon, I think he's a champion because he always makes in the right way the most simple things, and that's, for me, it's a great secret.
Bravo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you so much for that panel and for some very interesting insight into what to do a writer, start playing and then to work. So with that, we break for lunch. Book signings will be happening right outside the venue. Lunch for speakers will be served at Chawar, which is also right out there as you step outside the venue towards your left. And we'll see you all here at 2:05 after the lunch. Thank you for being with us.
I have a question for Rock.
Thank you. It was very good. Thank you. Very well done. Very. Congratulations. So that we are now the national
So how long are you here?
I think we came there for an hour.
So, and how long here
Okay.
in Delhi?
Delhi,
I'll be here tomorrow, so I might just meet you. Otherwise, I hope to see you in custody. You have the right.
If you can't, you can call me.
I will, and I will thank you for your fine service concert.
Oltre che un compagno di scuola.
Abbiamo scoperto ieri sera di essere.
Sei atleta, anch'io sono atleta.
Guarda tu, a te la dimostrare. Grazie al cibo italiano di cultura.
Non ci si vede, non ci si vede, sta una grande lì, sono dato dal Calosca e Gazzosca. Sono una quindi sei impegnato, se poi parti per...
Ma andiamo qua. Io non sono mai stata in Assam. Mai stata.
Abbastanza divertente.
Poi fa caldo.
No, fa freddo,
No,
ma
fa fredda. Ma qua mi fa caldo.
sei sicuro perché è più a nord del
No, però è spostato verso di là, quindi è spostato verso...
Comunque il cappottino non so.
Io secondo me fa calda qua.
La primavera dicembre presente.
No. No, comunque... Bravo. Però che è vero, no? Che io sono una grande appassionata di ormai le giornate, io sono una grande appassionata di giornate. Noi quando andiamo, è vero, il 60% dei video delle attività digitali, però
Vengono venduti.
vengono venduti, che ma ci sono veramente una galassia, diciamo che è una galassia, il italiano è una galassia, quindi è molto difficile da collocare gli scrittori all'interno di... E certo, secondo me Paolo ha un suo ruolo speciale,